We're going to officially call our meeting to order. And I'm going to start with a roll call to establish a quorum, starting to my right.
Steve Weeks, public member.
Jackie Crabtree, industry member. Polly Cordnes, industry member.
Lisa Tong, public member.
Dr. Carrie Williams, industry member.
Andrew Drapkin, public member.
Joseph Federico, industry member.
Okay, so we have established our quorum, and we will get started with the next item on the agenda, which are my opening remarks. And I simply just want to say thank you to our staff. Our Sunset Review report looks amazing, and so I'm so excited to really dive in, and I'm also really excited knowing how much work the board has put in really dealing with a lot of the issues, and we've gotten a lot of work done. And so I'm really excited and really proud, and I just really want to say thank you for all of your hard work. So the next item on our agenda are for our board members. If there's anyone who have any remarks that you would like to share at this time.
I would just echo what you just said about the involvement of staff on this. And Chrissy, if there's anyone that you should want to mention by name that really were active in participating in that, maybe put them on the record.
Thank you. I will. Of course, Tammy Guess, who, as you all know, is going to be leaving us soon, has been our main go-to on this project. So she has put it together and worked with the design people at the department who have also helped us a lot. But we do have people in the audience. We have our manager, Carrie Harris from Enforcement, and Teresa Reister from Sight and Fine, as well as lots of other staff, Marcine as well. We had, which Tammy was great at parceling it out, and it's quite a chore, but to see it all together has been great. But definitely I couldn't have done it without the work of those people. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other remarks? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which are public comments. Please remember that the public comment at this time are for items not on the agenda. So if you see any items not on the agenda and you have a public comment, please feel free to step towards the podium.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Michael Marion. I'm the new Bureau Chief for Private Post-Secondary Education, and I just wanted to come here and introduce myself. I've been in the seat for about 9 months now, and I had the pleasure of working with Christy and the folks from BBC. Obviously, we have some things, we have some emergency decisions that we've made over the last few weeks. Obviously, I can't talk about them publicly, but I'm happy to say that we've been doing some great work with BBC in the short time that I've been here, and look forward to doing more work with you as time goes on, and hopefully Sunset goes well for you and Sunset goes well for us. And if there's anything that I can do or in our support, please don't hesitate to let me know. That's it.
Thank you.
Hi there, Wendy Cochran, California Estheticians. I really want to take this time to thank you guys so much for considering a revision in scope of practice for us. You know, we're a group of on and off, depending on how angry you are about learning about the rules, about 4,000 people right now. And for us to have a voice and for us to see some positive changes with an industry that moves as quickly as it does, and for us to be taken out of 1978, we're very, very appreciative. So I would like to thank the board officially on behalf of all of our membership. And there's so many SD nerds out there that are so excited about getting a revision of scope so that we all can be compliant, because so many of us want to be compliant, but we can't compete with all the unregulated stuff and all the stuff that we've had left behind because of no scope of practice correction. So thank you again, and I'm so appreciative for all the work that you all put into this.
Thank you.
Good morning, Board. Fred Jones, Professional Beauty Federation of California. I didn't know when or if Dr. Marion was going to approach the speaker, and since he did, I wanted to take the opportunity to personally, and on behalf of my association, thank him for his short but very productive 9-month tenure. We look forward to many more 9-month tenures out of him. My association has forever had the position that if BPPE wasn't going to do their job, you all needed their job. You already approve schools, you approve the curriculum, and obviously you give the licensing exam. You do inspections to make sure they have appropriate facilities and equipment. You look at, make sure they have bona fide student enrollees. You do all that, but the really important stuff and the ability to really crack down on fraudulent schools were always left to the BPPE. And they did nothing, as far as I'm concerned, for the last 18 years on these fraudulent schools. And the fraudulent schools brings the reputation of all schools down. And it is one of the reasons why we are facing a deregulation movement here in California, because they look at schools and the cost of schools, and they hear these bad things that have happened in schools and say, the hell with it all, baby and bathwater. So the fact that already in his short tenure, we have shut down some fraudulent schools is more action than I have seen in 18 years of representing this industry. So I just wanted to personally thank his leadership, Dr. Marion's leadership at BPPE, and obviously your staff's cooperation and working with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments at this time? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is our executive officer's report, and I will defer to Ms. Christy Underwood.
Okay, so in your packets are our statistics. You can go ahead and take a look at those. There are a couple things I would like to highlight, excuse me, that are not necessarily in the statistics, as that is our Spanish pass rates. So as you can see, we continue to be around 34% for the Cosmos Spanish pass rate. We are looking to set up the task force that this board previously talked about. NIC has agreed to participate in that task force. So the concern is right now is we're trying to get a date for that, and there's the NIC representative that will be coming is from South Carolina. Is that a state? Okay. Wait, is that one of the ones? So we have the national conference coming up in early October, so we're just trying to work around, and that's in Seattle, trying to get the people from the East Coast over here. So we will hopefully have a date for that soon. However, we have been still running data on every idea we can think of to see if there's anything that stands out. So we did recently run some data, and in looking at for the most current fiscal year, the individuals that have taken the test in Spanish and have failed for 1 year, we looked at 1 year, of the top 10 who have taken the test, the top 10 with volume numbers, 5 of them are apprenticeship sponsors. So that's a concern that we need to look at. Because it's a totally different educational program than what's happening in school.
When you say apprenticeship sponsors, microphone. When you say apprenticeship sponsors, you mean it's like the apprenticeship program, not like the individual training salon that's actually doing the apprenticing?
So of the top, yeah, it's the sponsorship program.
Yes.
That's
Okay,
how we
that's
put it into our system. So instead of this individual going to Federico, they went through this particular apprenticeship.
I was just
sponsor.
I was just making sure that it wasn't like, that it was not traced down to the individuals. Each head teaching salon
No.
is actually, okay, that's what I was
No.
trying to differentiate.
That's a thought. So the top of all our top 10, 5 of them are apprenticeship. One of them is previously licensed. So it's people who have been licensed for a really long time or a really long time ago. And if their license has expired longer than 5 years, they have to take the test again. So they are failing the Spanish test. And then we have 4 schools in that top 10 who have high numbers of Spanish test takers who are failing. 3 of those 4 schools are approved to teach in Spanish, and their students are still failing. So they're on our list to kind of go visit and see if we can figure out what's going on. Now, if you separated all that out and looked at apprenticeship previously licensed, and schools, the pass rate's the same. They're still all, so my first thought was, well, let's take out apprenticeship programs and see how people are doing coming from schools. It's still at the 30% range. But there's a lot of people that are taking the Spanish test that did not go to a school that even teaches in Spanish. And it's throughout all of our schools. There will be one in very many of our schools have at least one test taker who chose to take the test in Spanish. So when you add all that up, it brings that percentage to where we get the 30% failure rate. So while it was a little bit enlightening for me, it wasn't too much, again, because it's still the same failure rate, but we are going to at least have a target that we can reach out to some of these apprenticeship committees and those schools that are approved to teach in Spanish to see if their thoughts on it and what they feel can be done. And hopefully maybe we can even get them to come to the table during our task force meeting on that issue. And then aside from that, our statistics are standard. If you have any questions, we can answer those. Our DRC continues to be moving right along at barely a backlog ever, first time ever. So I did want to also mention, it's kind of going to come up with one of the next items when we talk more about schools, is that we have done some staffing changes. We have dedicated an associate governmental program analyst, which is a state classification. We're kind of the high-level analyst, to be added to handle some school issues, because some of the stuff we're finding, which I'll talk about in the next agenda item, or a couple agenda items, is it just gets bigger every day with our issues. So we'll get there, though.
Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to our next item on the agenda, which is the approval of our board minutes. So I did have a question, Christy. Because the minutes are together, can we break them up into two votes, only because I wasn't at the May 20th
Sure.
meeting? Okay, so if I could call for an approval for the May 20th, a motion.
I will make that motion.
Okay, so the motion.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to approve the board meeting minutes. Is there any public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll call for a vote, and I'll start at my right.
Steve Weeks, yes?
Jackie Crabtree, yes. Polly Cordes, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, abstain.
Andrew Drabian, yes.
Joseph Federico, abstain.
Okay, and so now I need a motion for our July 23rd meeting minutes.
I will move.
Okay?
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor. Any public comment at this time? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote.
Approve? Steve Weeks?
Jackie Crabtree, yes. Polly Cordes, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Andrew Drabian, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Okay, the motion passes. Next on the agenda is item number 7, discussion and possible action relating to certification of student hours. And I will defer to Chrissy for this one.
So here we go. So it's pretty exciting and also scary. Some of the things that we have found and are continuing to find with the school situation are, our most recent issue is closed schools. So these are schools that have nothing to do with the Bureau, but we're finding now an alarming number of applicants coming in with proof of trainings from 5 years ago. Alarming numbers. So we are now,
So the thought is that they're maybe forging documentation from backdating it?
Yeah.
From when they were in existence?
because the schools are closed, they've been closed for some time. And like, for instance, we got 5 applications in one day from one school that has been closed for a very long time. So we're able to pull data, and it's not unheard of. Almost every school has students that went to school that didn't take the test for whatever reason, or maybe failed it right when they got out of school and decided to do something else, and then have decided to come back because their proof of training is good forever. I know Federico's, you even had a tiny little number on the report. Most schools had a tiny little number. Some schools have a large number, and we just don't buy it. So that's our new issue that we're working on, and that literally just came up last week. As for what we've done so far, there is a report in your packets, and to echo on what Dr. Marion mentioned earlier, when we wrote this memo, it says we've done 10 joint inspections. I think the number is actually higher than that because I do believe Heather and our new employee, Rachel Gaitan, went on inspections with the Bureau, several, I believe, just in the last couple weeks. So that's even a higher number. I can tell you that the progress that we've made since Dr. Marion has been on board is huge. It's been huge. We've been talking about schools at this board for a really long time, and this kind of stuff has never happened. So it's been a very big learning experience for us, though, we're doing joint inspections with the Bureau staff who have also been phenomenal to work with. We don't have the extra staff to dedicate to this, so it's been mostly myself and Heather who have been going out on these inspections, which is good. It's given us firsthand look at what we need. And again, like we mentioned in the last meeting, it's, and what we're saying in Sunset, we definitely need to strengthen up our own requirements because there's the selling of hours, and we know about that. But the lack of the actual curriculum that we have approved being taught in the schools is pretty bad, and that's kind of what we're seeing a lot of, even more so. Yes?
I'll wait for you to finish your report before I ask
So
questions.
you can see that in the past, I had mentioned that we stopped processing applications. So now everybody's been notified. Everyone that had an application with us has received some sort of letter from us. We did not go straight with a denial letter because if we denied individuals, that means they would have to wait a year to reapply. And there's two different sides of ugly in this situation. There are individuals who absolutely know they're buying hours, and I do believe there are individuals who are being misled into what is happening, because we do think there's people who are sitting for the number of hours, but they're just being taught to pass the test. So if you're a manicurist and you've just recently come to the country and you've been misled to think that you can do this, it's a 300-hour course, 400-hour course. To wait a year we thought was just way too much of a punishment when they can go to a good school and complete that within the year. So we sent letters to individuals saying, giving them information to withdraw their applications. And then we did do 275 formal denials to a school that is actually closed now, but we have strong evidence, and so we're not even giving the option. We just flat denied them. So that's huge. We've never issued anything like that before. So you can see the numbers of the items that we've done. The joint inspections are continuing. I think they have some scheduled this week. Like I mentioned, we took a vacant position that we had, I believe, in one of our examination sites that we didn't need, and we reclassed it to have a position here in Sacramento that's going to be focusing on going out to schools to for one, build better relationships with our schools, and then also to work with the Bureau as we have been doing. We are also hoping to add a position down south. It would be that person would work out of our Glendale facility, and then in the perfect world, we would have a northern person dedicated to schools and a southern person dedicated to schools to kind of balance out the workload for that. And we have those positions already. We've done some interviews. We haven't been able to fill the down south positions. Southern positions are usually a little bit harder to fill, but we're still working on that. In the meantime, we have our new analyst on board here in Sacramento, and she's been going out with Heather and working on a lot of projects. So I think over the next several months, you're going to be seeing a lot of recommendations coming, because I definitely think we need to put together a new regulation package on what we require for schools. And so I think we're definitely headed down the right path, but it was a much bumpier path than we thought it was. So, yes.
Couple questions. Okay, when you were stating that you've had staff reassigned, and that you basically have staff, and then you were saying that you were going to probably increase staff to have a southern. So we currently have one. Is that also the same person who's going to double as the northern person, or are you looking for a northern person, a southern person, and the current?
So we have a half-time employee that we've had for some time who's handled schools, Christine Jones, many of you might know her. So she's still with us. Then we've hired a new employee who's on board now, who's in Sacramento, who's going to be doing a lot of traveling. And then we're hoping to hire the southern.
So right now, you're hoping to have just one more headcount increase?
Right.
Okay, that's
Right.
right. And then also just down on your joint inspections, when you do a joint inspection, is that just a one day? Like, are you guys in and out in one day? Is it a multiple day?
It's one day for us.
Okay.
It's multiple days for the Bureau.
I can only imagine.
They do much more extensive review on the paperwork, not the items that we look at or
Yeah.
know even about. So theirs is much more extensive. We always feel very bad when we leave them
Yeah,
there for
coming
days.
from a school owner perspective, if you don't have that paperwork or don't even have an idea of what that paperwork is for the BPPE, when they come in for their audit, that'll be a long, lengthy process for them.
And that's pretty much what we've
Yeah.
experienced.
And then I just had one other question, under point number 4, under the significant issues that you found, you're saying students are being taught the CIBs. What is the CIB?
Oh, I'm sorry. Candidate Information Bulletins, which is the exam.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to make sure I knew what that was. And I think those were all my questions, so thank you.
Are there any additional questions? Should we open up for?
I just want to say, great job.
Yeah.
This is
Thank
so, yeah, reading through this and working with the Bureau, it's amazing.
Thank you.
So at this time, we're going to open up for public comment. So if there's any public comment at this time, you can approach the podium.
Hi there, Fred Jones, Professional Beauty Federation of California. So that said in your agenda, possible action on this item, but since you're already open up to public comments, I guess we're not going to do that. Obviously, no, I shouldn't say obviously, we support some sort of student enrollment requirement so that within 30 days of them enrolling in a school, basically the POT, proof of training process, should start immediately. So something needs to be submitted to your board or possibly to BPPE, so that a student who's enrolled last week isn't trying to take the test this week. We think it's pretty simple, and I've given my past legal opinion how I believe you have enough in your B&P code section to justify that, because it talks about a verifiable proof of training document. So this should be part of that POT process. The other thing I'd like to point out is most of our schools are accredited for purposes of Title IV federal loans, and that includes some of these fraudulent schools. So not only do you have Dr. Marion's agency at the state level to rely upon, and thank goodness we now have a partner that we can rely upon, you also have them defrauding the federal government. And as a condition of receiving Title IV money, they have to be accredited with a National Department of Education accredited agency. Most of them, in fact, I'm not sure there's any that are accredited outside of NACIS, which is a National Accrediting Commission. Pardon me?
We have one that's accredited outside of NACIS.
Okay.
And if I could just interrupt you real quickly,
Absolutely.
and thank you, because I totally forgot that we actually have been in contact with Dr. Anthony Mirando, who is the executive director of NACIS, and we actually have a conference call scheduled with him for either later this week or early next week. They've been we've reached out to them, and they have been more than willing to start communications. We haven't had communications with them in the past, and they've been very willing to set up some meetings and start discussions on how they can help with us as well.
And to put this in,
I just have one other question. How many schools are in California that are that are just in general?
Total schools is, I'm sorry? 250, around there. That's not an exact number. We don't know how many of those are accredited. I can tell you, though, that we did just recently visit a school that's on, we have visited schools that are accredited that have some very serious concerns. And we've actually already relayed that to NACIS as well. And they've actually relayed some to us that we didn't have on our list, so.
excellent. And Mr. Federico mentioned how difficult life can be when BPPE comes knocking. You ain't seen nothing yet when NACIS comes knocking. Oh, proctology exam comes to mind. But one thing I want to express publicly, and this is webcast, so other people will see it. I think it's important to note, and I'm about to toot your staff's horn, that your board does not receive any resources from schools. You're not receiving any of BPPE's licensing fees. You can't even find schools. So there are no revenues coming into your board for all of the work you've just heard Ms. Underwood summarize that all of her staff have been doing. So I would certainly hope that, well, the point is, what some of this new ground that your staff is blazing, the reason why it's new is because they've never had the onus to do this. And they have really been proactive in an unprecedented way. And I'm telling you, schools are hearing the message. It doesn't take much, but when you start denying students entry to the exam, believe me, that word gets out quickly. So I thanked Dr. Marion earlier. Let me thank Christy Underwood and her staff now.
Thank you.
I just would like to piggyback on that comment where you're going to be going or starting to have conversations with NACIS, the accrediting body. But one of the things that one of the elements of accreditation that is required to maintain Title IV funding is that you are required to have state authorization, that you're authorized by your state to basically do what you can do. So when you're doing your joint inspections with BPPE, the state authorization is given by the BPPE. Like, that's what we use as our approval, and we have to submit that as part of our proof every year for our accreditation. So by removing, if the BPPE has the power to immediately remove the authorization and then then you can immediately contact the accrediting agency, who would then be verified, they would be aware that that school is basically no longer in compliance with their accreditation. So that might be a quicker route to it.
So just to clarify, the emergency decisions prevent enrollment and tuition, accepting tuition.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily immediately shut down. So I can tell you that we are also working. Actually, we've worked with the Bureau, and we've gotten together to get our deputy attorney generals together, because we are looking to possibly do some interim suspension orders, which is a pretty big step for us. It would be brand new, something that we have the authority to do, but we've never on salons. So we're trying to look to see if we could do that on schools as well. So both the Bureau and our board are going down these enforcement processes, because there's still a process after the emergency decisions take place. Then it's now everything is in the hands of the Attorney General's office. So they're pursuing with the boards and the bureaus, the process that would normally take action. It's just that there's shorter timeframes now because of the things that have taken place. So while we're going down this, it's definitely, like I mentioned, uncharted waters for us. So it's definitely something we are looking to see what more can we do down the same lines, because those schools are still open right now.
No, I understand. I was just bringing that point up that basically if we end up able to remove approval
Right.
from the schools, then it's almost a shortcut rather than having to go through the accrediting agency. If you could just notify that the
Oh,
accrediting
right.
agency that this school's approval has been removed, then basically they're no longer in compliance with
Yeah.
their accreditation.
And I will say that on the several inspections I have been on, which have been terrible schools, in my opinion, none of those were accredited. Most of the really bad
Yeah.
ones are not
No,
accredited.
I assume so.
But we did just come across one that is, so.
Okay.
Our system lives or dies by the quality of the schools that are out there. I mean, they are essentially part of our partnership with the establishments in making this whole system work. I got to tell you, the last business I'd want to be in right now is to run a for-profit school, simply because of those few bad players are taking away legitimate businesses from the schools that are doing the right thing. So I just think that, there are bad players out there, but we also should also probably recognize that there are other schools that are doing a good job and making the system work, but we tend to focus on the bad players, of course. So.
And on that note, we have, because we have a new employee who's new to our board, we've been able to reach out to other schools to we didn't want to just take rid of the bad schools. So honestly, Federico's has been a great asset to us. They've put us in touch with, I want to say, your educational director?
Yeah.
Who's been a huge help, because again, it's a learning curve for us. But recently, we've gone to some Paul Mitchell schools, we've gone to Citrus Heights Beauty School. These are schools that we don't have concerns with, that opened their doors to us and let us come in and have been more than helpful when we have questions that we don't know. So there's a lot of schools out there that are really helping us as well. And then our goal with these new positions is to build that relationship with those schools, good schools, because we haven't had that. We do inspections of schools, but we want to totally change how we do that. Our inspectors are for health and safety, and they go into the clinic floors and do inspections for health and safety. Most of the schools we have problems with right now don't have clinic floors. No clinic floors at all. They're not providing services to consumers. So with our new positions, we want to build that relationship better with the schools so that they can ask us questions and we can ask them questions. And I think it's a win-win for everybody at the end.
So as Fred was saying earlier, and then we've talked about this before, which is basically almost requiring like a registration when a student begins to submit to you. Is that how do we begin that process? Is that something we have to begin in here through motion?
Actually, I think we should add it to sunset. So when we discuss sunset, I think that should be part of the motion.
Okay.
I absolutely think and I can tell you that most other states have some type of process similar to that. They have electronic filing of the hours that, keep in mind, we're California, so we have a huge volume compared to most other states. But we've reached out to a lot of other states as well for help on these issues. And most of the other states have either a student registration at time of enrollment, like our board used to have many years ago, or they have electronic filing of the student hours, and it has to be done on a monthly basis. So I don't know that we could technically go in that route, but I definitely think we should pursue student enrollment. I believe it was even in the last sunset review. You remember that? But it's something we've talked about for a long time. I think it would be a great idea.
Christy, are the schools, do they have a focus that you're noticing when you're going into them as far as, are they focusing on nails more in these schools, or is it all cosmetology, or is it SD? Is there anything that's standing out, or?
It's Cosmo, Estes, and Manny's. It's definitely those three. We come across a lot of schools that have added the Barber program, and we have concerns with the Barber programs because a lot of it is self-study. We don't know how that could happen. But the barbers are usually there for the full amount of time. They might not be getting the education they deserve. We don't see very many barbers buying hours. Would you agree, Carrie? It's the lowest. So we have some concerns with barbers' quality of education, but not necessarily with the selling of hours. But it is predominantly manicurist. Next is, we're finding a lot of licensed manicurists that now want to become cosmetologists or estheticians.
So I know I shared this with you, but I want to put it on record. Because this is happening so much in the nail industry, and people are buying their hours and becoming manicurists, and it's huge in California. The labor commissioner, who I'm on another board with, and have shared my concerns with our industry, did recently go into a nail salon in Los Angeles and found that 35 of the nail techs were being misclassified employees, and the nail salon was fined $1.5 million for misclassification, because I believe that, a lot of the individuals are getting their license in manicuring, going to work in these nail salons and not knowing what the laws and rules,
Right.
and being mistreated. So I think all of that obviously comes hand in hand with the problem as it keeps continuing to grow.
And I think that's a really important issue because there might be somebody from the outside who doesn't really know the industry say, but they can do nails. And they probably can. They probably can do nails great, but they haven't been taught the labor laws. They haven't been taught health and safety. We ask some of these students about disinfection, and they do not know the process for disinfection. They're taught just to pass the test, so they're memorizing the test is what they're doing. But none of them, we have the new health and safety course, and very few, and I want to say maybe just 2 schools, this breaks Tammy's heart a little bit, even knew what it was. They didn't even know what it was, and we sent it to them. We mailed it to them in CD form, and we have instructor guide pamphlets and student handbooks, and the instructors or the owners did not even know what it was. So they're not even getting basic labor information. And then there's another flip side to all of this, because like I said, something else comes up every school we go to. We went to one school recently, and it was a very busy school, had a very busy clinic floor. It was filthy, and equipment was breaking or broken. And the instructors that we met with, though, I truly believe were doing the best they could with what they had. So then there's that issue. There's the issue that, and this is an accredited school, there's an issue that this school is being funded, and it's, the instructors were, these were some hardworking individuals who knew what they were doing and doing really the best. And they invited us in to talk to their students, and it went really well. And I think the great students, but the school just, the staff wasn't getting what they needed from their owner. So that becomes a whole other issue.
I agree with that, and the scary thing is that we see, obviously, how much infections do happen in the nail area. So, the big concern of all the continuing of disease and infection
Right.
with the nail industry.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments at this time? Okay, so we'll move on to our next item on the agenda. which is the review of our National Interstate Council Cosmetology Examination Audit. We actually have a staff member here from the Office of Professional Examination Services to give us a brief overview of the National Exam Review.
Good morning. I'm
Good morning.
Irene Wong-Chi with the Office of Professional Examination Services, also known as OPES. At the request of the board, OPS evaluated the use of the NIC cosmetology examinations for licensing in California. First, OPS conducted an occupational analysis of cosmetology practice in California. Next, OPS reviewed the NIC examination programs by conducting 2 evaluations. 1, a psychometric evaluation of the procedures used to develop and administer the examinations, and 2, a comparison between results of the California occupational analysis and the results of the National Occupational Analysis performed by NIC. To conduct this comparison, OPS worked with subject matter experts who were licensed cosmetologists recruited by the board. OPS also reviewed NIC's occupational analysis, test development processes, and examination and administration procedures against legal and professional guidelines and technical standards. For this project, the most relevant standards are the standards for educational and psychological testing and OPS's validation policy 12-01, which is based on California Business and Professions Code Section 139. OPS found that the most critical areas of California cosmetology practice were measured on the NIC examinations, thereby making them suitable for use in California. OPS also found that, for the most part, the procedures used to establish and support the validity and defensibility of NIC's theory and practical examinations met professional guidelines and technical standards. However, OPS found some procedural areas that could be improved. A copy of the executive summary is included in the board packet. The whole report is not included due to strict confidentiality parameters in order to protect NIC's test development, test administration processes, and test evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you so much for that thorough report. Do you have any questions, Christy? No, we're good? Okay. So we're going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the review and conditional approval of our 2019 Sunset Review Report Draft. Right.
So this is our first draft, so keep that in mind, because we've found, since we've sent it out, some typos and maybe some grammatical changes. We are looking for kind of a conditional approval. Keep in mind, this will come to you again in October for the final review. We would like to add to the report kind of an executive summary that would come from our leaders. And that would kind of highlight everything, we've done so much, as you mentioned in the beginning, Dr. Carey. So I thought, so we can add that to right in the beginning, because unfortunately not a lot of people are going to read it from cover to cover. We did separate it this year into 2 different volumes, which I really like, because when you look at volume 1, this is kind of our meat of our Sunset Review. And in our office, we use these like on a regular basis to refer back to, because there's so much data in them, so it looks really good to have it separated like that. So it's open for discussion. Any items that you think should be added or removed, or?
I'd like to go back and add that addition, as I was saying, in regards to student registration.
Okay.
And then I'd been thinking about this, and we had discussed last time in the Sunset hearing, or to talk about Sunset, that going after additional license types. And I believe the additional license type included a makeup artistry license in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about this is, I think we had 3 different license types. Haircutting was one, waxing was another, and makeup artistry was the third. Out of those 3 licensing types, I believe only 2 are supported by the NIC, the National.
That's correct.
My thought would be, would it strengthen our case more by just going with the two that have national standarding rather than trying to throw everything up against the wall with makeup artistry? I mean, I feel like you might have a stronger case if you say, look at, these are two other license types that that are already nationally recognized because they have a standardized test to them, rather than saying like, these are a bunch of different license types that we want, and a couple of them have tests and some of them don't. That was one of my thoughts in regards to that. So I don't
I
know
agree.
where you want to take it.
Up to the board.
Any,
I would kind of concur with Joe, I mean, especially since there is a move to get rid of all licensing. I don't know if we want to create a license to something that's not nationally recognized.
agree? I said agree. Is there any additional comment or questions? I think we're all pretty much in agreement with that. Yes.
Are we discussing now the Sunset Review report broadly?
Yes, if there's any questions or additions, anything you would like to see, this is our first draft.
I have some questions,
Yes.
if I may, regarding the PSP holders. One is, we define a PSP licensee as someone who performs limited barbering and cosmetology services outside of a licensed establishment. I'm just wondering if this could cause, I think we maybe should have a better definition of what a PSP is. This could cause, the specific language in this proposal, we need to keep them from acting as establishments themselves, and establishing small offices, whether they call them company offices, since they are independent business people, and invite people in there. But it doesn't say that they can't operate at a fixed public location, which they call their office or whatever, like an establishment. I would suggest the wording, and if you have better wording than this, that we continue on with that, someone who performs limited barbering cosmetology services outside of a licensed establishment, but only at a customer location. PSP licensee may not act in any way as an establishment licensee with a fixed location serving multiple customers.
So are you trying to say that if they have a fixed location, then they need an establishment license? Okay.
I just want to prevent that as being an issue in the future, that some of these PSPs may turn into illegal establishment licensed people. So if we could broadly add some language to better define what they do, it might be a little bit better.
Yeah.
The other question I have is, it appears that we really need to have new health and safety protocols for the PSP licensees. I mean, drastically different. Basically, we just say use disposable tools whenever possible, but require that they, quote, follow all laws, rules, and regulations governing the practice for which the PSC holder is licensed by the board. Well, if we held them to this, what's required of essentially an establishment individual, it's not going to happen. I mean, are they going to travel with disinfectant solution? Are they going to travel with clean and dirty covered labels for everything? A traveling trash container? What about towels and smocks? Do they have to travel with clean and dirty containers? I mean, by my count, there's like 14 covered and labels alone that are necessary if they would fairly comply with our law now, which means they'd be walking into each house with a box is 6 foot tall. So pretty quickly, we better define what is required of them, because it's going to take an amendment beyond what's required of our establishments. Okay. And the other thing is maybe we can look at a possible review in the short-term future of how this program is going. We have now, what about like 10 different licenses that we issue, and this is the only one we're going to have no inspection ability at all, none. We can't walk into Mrs. Jones' bathroom with our inspector and ask to see how she's performing her procedure, even if we knew what it was. So they're going to be out of our reach. And historically, we find 80% of our inspections that we do right now, they're citations for noncompliance with health and safety laws, a huge amount of that. So my worry is that, this train is leaving the station right now. And as a board, we're standing on the platform waving goodbye to it, hoping that it arrives at its destination. So I think we need a little more teeth into what we're doing. So I would suggest that maybe we add a review of the PSP program by this board in, say, 2 years to see how things are progressing, what are our positive and negatives we learn from it, kind of our own little sunset review on this program.
Excellent, Mr. Weeks. I agree with all of the suggestions and recommendations that you made. Thank you so much.
I agree also. I mean, I think that I think this is just too broad, the language. It's not holding down what we can inspect. I think we're just opening up
Are we discussing the PSP language?
so much free fall. I know people are doing this, but as Mr. Weeks is saying, that if we don't put more into this and just let the train leave the station, this is just, we can't control this. We're already having a limited
So-
inspectors now.
Just to be clear, you're talking about the PSP. We're going to talk about that specific reg language. Right.
Okay.
But you are also referring to adding some information into Sunset.
Where would it be best added? Those three
No, I
items?
agree, definitely into Sunset.
Yeah.
Yes. But if we're talking about the actual language that's being proposed, that's going to be
Okay.
regulations.
I got
Okay.
another one of those things that might skirt on both of those, which is trying to get some, this seems like it'd be probably statutory, trying to get some language where we have some kind of control or like with these apps that are coming out, that there's some kind of regulatory that we can have some kind of feedback with the apps that or have some governance at least. Does that make sense?
Regulation?
Some, yeah, there we go, that's the word I'm looking for. Some oversight with, between all of these apps, because I have a feeling that as the PSP get moving forward, a lot of people will probably be taking the app route through the PSP, and what I see is a denigration of like the standard establishment, and basically less and less people kind of going under the under establishment, so where's going to be that? I mean, and we send out these circular letters, and we send them out to establishments sometimes, so it's like, where's going to be that feedback loop that for these individual PSP people, or are we just going to have to treat them all individually and send every single person with a PSP a circular letter, if come time being?
Right.
And I feel that also with these people, or excuse me, with these apps, it's that we keep on, you heard my defense against kind of the PSP in the last state board meeting, but I feel that we need we're applying too much 20th century thinking to kind of like this newer, to like kind of something that might need some 21st century thinking. And so even having the apps basically that they had to incorporate that that you can do the instant feed, that you do some kind of feedback upon your service technician vis-a-vis the app, that'll automatically get directed back to state board. Does that, because I imagine that there's going to probably be a review portion on these apps, but maybe they can have a little like link that they'll be required to collect that would send them back to state board, and then it automatically fill in, because if it has the person's information, it automatically automatically populate with the PSP's number, and the person can do their or a client can do a evaluation or something like that. I'm just trying to think of alternative means as we kind of move forward with something like this.
Problem with that is, how would you enforce that? I'm an app designer in Singapore, and I'm putting something together, and I'm pulling, I'm checking on Breeze to see if these people are licensed. They don't have to, I don't know how we would control saying, hey, you must,
Yeah.
all 1-star reviews need to be,
Yeah.
they cut my ear, they can't,
Yeah.
can't say, then it's all automatically going to go to
No,
us.
no, it wasn't, it wasn't more of like having it, it was maybe even just having like them providing a link that would link, if the person's in California, then it'd be a link back to maybe like a state board. I don't, like I said, these ideas are very premature. I just feel like I
That's
just
why
feel
it
like we
should
need to
be-
start thinking in these terms in order to kind of get ahead of ourselves or to make sure that we're staying in here, because as Steve was just saying, what could be the ultimate, like, way this can end up turning out is,
Well, unless we tied it to brick and mortar.
I'm not gonna open up that conversation again. Yeah, but I'm just trying to think of some other way, some other means that we can make sure that we are maintaining some kind of oversight, but.
Interesting. I have no idea how many PSPs would be for apps and how many would be on their own. I mean, that would be interesting. I mean, that's certainly something we could,
But I
mean,
think,
it could
yeah,
change
I was gonna
quickly,
say,
I guess,
I think my initial thought is I think it needs to start with maybe like trying to get some kind of oversight with the apps that develop or the apps that decide to do business within the state of California, and trying to maintain a little bit of oversight with that.
I would agree. I think that's a good idea, too. And I think that's something we don't want to overlook, is that we have the possibility maybe to a bit of oversight on all these app people that are making, using our profession out there to create businesses, marketing companies. Maybe we should have a little bit of, at least some formal method of communication with these people to make sure that everything's being done correctly. And let's see where it takes us.
Is there some way for us to require that PSP holders or the apps must submit any consumer complaints directly to the board within a certain time frame? I know that would be really difficult to enforce, but it sounds like something that if we were to find that consumer harm did occur and it was relayed to the PSP holder or the app company, that the platform itself, but was never reported to the board, then we could at least hold them accountable after the fact. Either, being able to, because I feel like if we don't have any of that language, then we actually can't cite them for anything. So.
yeah.
Okay, got you.
I think there's some information in our proposed regs that kind of addresses that already.
Okay.
That we could certainly expand on as well.
Okay, so are there any additional questions, comments, remarks regarding our sunset, our first draft?
Are we getting ready to vote on the first
Well, we do need a
draft?
motion. No, we don't need a motion?
We don't
Oh,
need a
okay.
motion. We're just going to take your input and we're going to bring it back in a fabulous-looking format with no typos.
On the
never
areas that we suggested, then, they will be addressed in some format in the sunset review.
Yes.
With the understanding that other portions of it will require regulations, and we can start that whole process. And
Yes, and for example, when we talk about the app and potential regulating of the app, I think that's something we should, I don't know that we can come up with firm statutory language on that right now or that quickly. But I think it's important that we put that it's concern and that it's on our radar and we're going to look at what we can do. I mean, we might be able to. I mean, the first thing we're going to do is see if any other states have anything similar, if any other states are regulating the app companies. So, but yes, we will include this in the sunset information.
I have another question. You referred in the sunset review to the experience with PSPs in the state of New York. So the state of New York allows
Where are you referring to?
somewhere in,
There's it's
This.
probably the report.
there was reference to
In
New
the,
York
right,
on
the PSP report.
Yeah. So they're allowing it in the state of New York. There is such a license.
Uh-huh. Oh, there's several.
What is the experience of the State Board, Oversight Board in New York with their PSP licenses?
I don't recall recall when I talked to New York, the state that I do have the most familiarity with was, I think it was Washington. They report no issues. They have had, it's been smooth sailing for them since day one, no real consumer harm. And they have limited.
For both of their
control
licensees.
For their PS, yeah, right. So they have a lot smaller license population than we do, so, you know, it will be to scale for us. But they were very encouraging about the whole process, so I was a little surprised.
The last question on the Sunset Review also is, I saw a lot of statistics in size of our licensee population inside here, but the one statistic that I think is such a blowout, maybe we should somehow lead up front with so they see it, and that's the total size of our licensee populations in California. I saw other things in there, but it's such an overwhelming number, and it gives great importance to what we do as a board, that maybe towards the front of the report, you could just
Yep.
pump that out.
I have a few questions. I had made a number of small notes, and I don't know if we needed to go through all of that right now, or should I call this out to staff in terms of like different things?
Unless it's a substantial information, you can just forward it to us.
Okay, because I just had some overall notes like avoiding the use of acronyms because I'm sure legislature and staff are not familiar.
Okay.
So they wouldn't know what those acronyms stand for. I know that on page 4, we mentioned the attendance of the board meetings. I just wanted to know if we have the number of viewers from our webcast to include.
We looked, we checked, but it changes throughout the whole meeting, and so there's not a
I
way
see.
to, people drop on and off.
Okay.
Can you report just views? Like as of this date, these views, many views of this, and, you know, even if they only watch the 5 minutes versus, you know, 3.5
When they
hours,
first
but
start opening numbers or something, or halfway or something.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think maybe just total viewers who even checked in at some point is fine. I just know that, like, reading through this, I had questions that I know staff and legislature will also be asking, since, you know, we call out the fact that attendance has gone down, but we don't provide a number for the webcast. So we might as well include that information since I know that they're going to ask about it. And just throughout our summary of what the committees have done, I know that they will probably ask about, especially with health and safety. I know that we work with like the Healthy Nail Salon Collab, but they weren't listed as being a part of that. I know a lot of the legislature is very familiar with that organization, so I think it would be nice for them to be able to see that we do work with them. And specifically regarding translations, if we do have any numbers, since I know that we just started implementing this, but just in terms of the number of people we've served with the optional translation services, I think would be helpful.
Do you mean at DRC?
Both. So I know for DRC, we definitely have those numbers.
Okay.
But in terms of inspections in the field, since I know that that was a huge part of Sunset Review last time, where they really wanted us to address these translation issues, providing them those numbers, I think would be really helpful.
I don't think we can get it on.
I'm just trying to see if there are other big notes to
Think about it.
call out. I think that's it.
And then if you see any grammatical or non-substantive changes, feel free to email them to me, just in case it's something we haven't caught. Okay.
Or if you're reading something and you know that's going to ask another question, to let us know that too.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
The more eyes we can have, the better.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. Are there any additional comments, remarks, updates, changes to this first draft?
Good
Okay.
first draft, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, we'll take public comment.
Wendy Cochran, California Aesthetic Alliance. You may want to mark this document as draft. There has been an incident this week where the schools got a hold of the information and they are blasting it out that it's now legal for estheticians to provide lash tinting, brow tinting, and perming. And so they took that information somehow at a school level and they blasted it out to the students and caused quite a big stir in quite a few of the social media platforms that we discuss things. So draft watermarking all over this document would be really, really helpful. It's great that the information's out there, but we just want to make sure that everybody understands that this is not law yet, and it actually will take quite a bit of time for us to get a revision in scope. So thank you very much. I
Thank
just
you.
remembered that one.
Thank you.
Fred Jones, PBFC. Just a couple things that your report doesn't have that we would like for your consideration. And a lot of this is in the context of the delicensing concern, but also the low Spanish scores. Right out of the get-go, I'll make another pitch to have this board get back into compliance with existing law, the B&P code section that says, quote, "For purposes of grading, the practical shall prevail," end of quote. The only way, if you have two portions of an exam, the only way to make one prevail over the other is to somehow make the scoring aggregated in some fashion. And just to point out through absurdity what I mean, you can make the practical exam 1,000,000 points, and you can make the written exam 10 points. But if you say you have to get 70% or 75% on both of those, they have equal weight. Because if you don't get 75%, in other words, 7.5 right on the written, but you get 1,000,000 out of 1,000,000 in the practical, you still don't get licensed. And I know NIC has been tasked to look into that and to see what the effects of some sort of weighted formula could result in increasing the Spanish test score. I have no doubt it will. The question is, will it so dramatically increase everybody else's test score that now you're starting to get into validity issues? So I think doing something with becoming compliant with existing law would be helpful on the Spanish pass rate. It also acknowledges the reality of this industry. This is a hands-on dexterous and artistic industry. We're not a bunch of accountants, or in my case, lawyers. We're not bookworms. We're right brain, creative people. And the legislature recognized that reality in emphasizing the prevalence that the practical scores should have in the overall licensing exam. And then finally, I'll say, if you did have some sort of aggregate score, one score, it would solidify and clarify this misnomer that there are two licensing exams. Because I continue to get hit with that charge when I'm trying to defend our license. Oh, you have to go to school for 10 months, you have to pay $30,000 a year, which is more than double the average, but these are the talking points they're using. And then you have to take and pass 2 separate licensing exams. So let's remove that talking point as well. So there's a lot of reasons why some sort of examination weighted formula, because I know certain people in this room hate the term aggregate scoring. We can come up with semantics, but I think there's a solution there. The other thing that's missing in this report, and you've heard me say it many times, so I won't bore you with the details, but is I think we should dramatically increase externship opportunities. The single most effective and used talking points for delicensure is barriers to entry. So the sooner we can get students who want to become licensees into a salon setting, and even given the option to earn while they learn, the more we can take away this argument that there's these artificial barriers to make a living in this industry. Right now, you have to get 60% of your schooling completed before you can qualify for an externship. Why? Why don't we wait until they finish their theoretical instruction that teaches all about the pathogens and health and safety, et cetera? All of that could be done within the first 25% of the schooling. So why wait for 60? We limit, according to your regulations, not law, they can only have 8 hours of salon experience a week and a total of 10% of their overall clock hour credit. Why? That is valuable experience. If you want to become a licensee through the apprenticeship process, you need a 40-hour course, 39 hours. And then you're in a salon making money. So why are we holding schools to such a higher level? And as Ms. Underwood pointed out, how well are those apprenticeships doing, at least vis-a-vis the Spanish test scores? If half of our bad ones were apprenticeships, what's the proportion of people that become licensed through apprenticeship versus school? 95.5? 98.2? 99.1? Probably the latter. And yet they're half of the problem. So I don't think we should hold schools to such a high level. Let's get the kids out in the salons working, and if a salon owner thinks they're worthy, let them pay, because right now the law says they can't pay. On the sub-license categories, creating new licenses, I'm glad Mr. Federico called that out. It's a concern of ours. I understand your reasoning about the 2 out of 3 that you and Mr. Drabkin both discussed. The problem I have with waxing, any idea of sub-licensing existing licenses is you're going to be eroding away the more general license and creating potential unintended consequences. However, given the survey results of your own board of our licensees that 92% of cosmetologists just do hair, it makes sense. There is a valid data set that justifies a hairstylist license. That also has the benefit, again, of lowering the barrier to entry for those 92% that will choose that option. However, waxing, is it a bona fide standalone career? Does it erode the esthetician license? Is there data justifying that 92% of estheticians only do waxing? No, none of that is there for waxing. And don't even get me started on makeup, but I don't need to because I think you made it clear that was definitely going to micro. So I think hairstylist license is justifiable. The others, the jury is at least still out. You've mentioned student enrollment registration. I've already discussed it, so I assume it'll be in there. Let me make a point about personal service permit. Steve has done some really yeoman work on this effort, and I really appreciate Mr. Weeks' appointment to this board. He's someone who had no experience with this industry and has really scaled the learning curve quickly and with great diligence and professionalism. Yes, a PSP is unenforceable. You can't inspect it. I don't know how we get over that hump. But one of the things that make it more inspectable and therefore more enforceable is tying it to a brick and mortar salon. Now, we had the co-chair of the Sunset Review Committee, the current chair of the Assembly BMP Committee's chief of staff here at our last meeting. And she said her boss does not want it tied to brick and mortar. I get that. And politics is the art of compromise. But I still want to at least have a principled, justified position, stronghold. Brick and mortars, if it's tied to a brick and mortar establishment, and keep in mind, brick and mortars are the true stakeholders to this industry. Individual licensees and salon owners. The amount of employer-based salons in the last 30 years has dropped like a lead balloon. Why? Well, workers' compensation rates, rising minimum wage. There's a lot of reasons why it's a hell of a lot cheaper to become a booth rental-based salon. And don't even start me with all the illegalities that are associated all too often with booth rental-based salons. But that's who the legitimate stakeholders have to compete with. We also, our legislature told those employer-based salons, you can no longer pay your employees commission wages. We'll create a new system called piece weight wages, but it is a bookkeeping nightmare. It is unworkable as a means of paying someone in a salon setting. So something that has been ubiquitous in an employee-based salon since time immemorial has now been removed because of AB 1513. Unless you're one of the 0.05% of salons that can pay your salon employees $30 an hour, and then on top of that, give them some commission wages. But those numbers are so small, it's not even worth discussing. So there is no way of paying commission anymore. So these stakeholders in our industry are dying because of laws and regulations passed in Sacramento. What will a PSP do to help or exacerbate that situation? Now, it's not your job to make sure that these businesses are profitable. Your job is solely to protect consumers. But an employer is responsible for every activity and action and behavior of her employees. That's a vested interest in making sure their employees are properly trained. So you have a partner in employers that you don't have in a booth rental setting, and you sure in the heck won't have in a PSP app world. So if your concern should rightly be on health and safety, look to support, prop up, and defend, and even advocate for those that are true stakeholders in the same endeavor.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Because this public comment is relating to the Sunset Report, I wanted to ask if you could let us know specifically during this time what you would like for us to consider to add to the Sunset Report.
Absolutely. I'm sorry I'm not clear enough. Everything I'm saying. I think you should address combining the written and the practical exam scores into one passage score. I think you should dramatically reduce the arbitrary restrictions on the existing externship program, including right now the inability to pay externs, student externs. I think if you are going to create a new license category, it should be limited to just hairstyling, not waxing and not makeup. I believe you should have student enrollment or registration, whatever other word you want to use, for all students within 30 days of enrolling in this school. I think the personal service permit should return to an establishment, a brick and mortar, where inspections can be done of their protocols and their equipment, where records can be kept and inspected, and where there is an employer who is ultimately held responsible for all the actions and activities of the personal service permittee and the services happening outside an establishment. Is that clear?
Yes.
And then I will just recommend that in the legislature, nobody reads more than one page. Sometimes you can get them up to 2 pages, but 100 pages is not going to be read by anybody. This is a great report. Key people will read key sections. You don't know what sections those will be, so this is a great report. I applaud your staff for putting it together and for each of your time in editing and reading through it. However, I'd strongly recommend an executive summary that really calls out, here is what we're asking for in specificity right out of the gate. And Mr. Weeks, again, is spot on. Barriers to entry. Have a nickel for every time I've heard that in the last 2 years in the legislature. We already license over 1.5% of every man, woman, and child in California. If there's a barrier, you guys are doing a poor job enforcing it. So having that number, the 550+ thousand people that are currently licensed by you, definitely needs to be in the first sentence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy Cochran, California Estheticians. I do have to kind of disagree with one of the points that Mr. Jones brought up. We have plenty of six-figure estheticians out there that all they do is brows and Brazilians. They have not touched a facial since the day they left school. We all find what we excel in life. Some gals, all they do is lashes. Some gals and guys, all they do is waxing, and some of us, all we do is facials. We don't tend to do this catch-all of doing every single thing that we possibly can. Those tend to be the newer people trying to find their way into the industry. But there are plenty of people in the industry right now that show me interest that they would like to just be doing brows all day long and waxing and or sugaring services. So I think that that's something that I appreciate about what you're going after with having that segmented licensure. I know plenty of estheticians throughout the country that have made their businesses with just a waxing license. And that's all they want to do all day long. They don't want to do the fluffy steaming and the exfoliation. They don't want to get involved in the chemistry of all that. They want to have their clients in, they want to wax them, they want to get them out the door and make money. That's all they want to do. So thank you very much for considering having that as well. And also the makeup license would be really greatly appreciated because I think that some of the sanitation issues that we come across in feedback from everybody's conversations, sanitation issues that we have with people that are just going out and doing makeup services that are outside of a Macy's or a Nordstrom's or something like that are pretty substantial. So thank you very much for considering those two categories.
Thank you.
Rich Hedges, member of the public. Thank you very much. The Sunset Report, I think, was well done, as everyone's already said. And I particularly want to thank Mr. Weeks for his due diligence on the report as being a new member, and all made very good comments. I want to second most of what Mr. Jones said, and I would say, just to comment to the last speaker, you deserve six figures if you're doing a lot of Brazilians. So I just want to talk for a moment about the PSP and what we might want to put in a report on it. I think we can license the apps. I don't think that's a problem. If we need legislation to do it, let's get it, because somebody has to be held responsible for making sure that licensed people are doing this work. And if they're sending people to clients, then they need to make sure they're licensed and not just say that they're making sure they're licensed. And they need to be responsible if someone is harmed by a person who isn't licensed, they've sent to someone's home. And let me just say that there may even be something we can do as an organization. When San Antonio decided to actually license Uber and and force them to do background checks on their drivers, they said, well, we're leaving the area. They said, fine, they set up their own app. So unless there's something in law requiring that we can't set up our own app and make sure that people are licensed, we might want to look at doing that. I don't believe there's anything in law, but as long as we're not operating for profit through that, I think we could offer it as a service. So that's the bulk of my comments, other than to say that this is going to have a large impact. The PSP is one of the major complaints I used to hear in DRC, who people were fined, and especially when they had a very low price point. We can't afford to do all these things. There's so much competition in the old downtown I'm in. Many of our old downtowns in California cities depend on brick and mortar shops for the rents and to keep the downtowns alive. And this is also going to have an impact on those, I think. But we're seeing these impacts throughout the economy. Amazon Go is now going to eliminate the need for cashiers. Walmart, who has not implemented it but did the technology many years ago, RFID technology, where there's no need for cashiers if they ever implement the system they have, where it just charges your credit card when you leave. So we're experiencing some very new things through technology, and they're going to have an economic impact on a lot of things that we've traditionally enjoyed. So thank you very much. And again, Mr. Weeks, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Tracy Montez. I'm the Division Chief of Programs and Policy Review here at the Department of Consumer Affairs, and the Office of Professional Examination Services is one of the units in my division. I have a very long history at DCA, over 20 years. Started as program levels like Irene. I worked on occupational analyses for your board and did exam development. I was also the manager of OPS, and again, now I've been exec. And then I've spent a very small period of time as an independent consultant, during which that time I actually did the audits of the NIC exam and helped your board with that decision to move over to the national exam. So the reason why I share all this with you is that I have spent much time talking to your board about aggregate scoring. And this is an issue that comes up about every 4 to 6 years when we have an influx of new board members, and the question comes up about the practical prevailing. So I just want to let you know that prevail is not a psychometric term. It means it's not valid, it's not defensible, it's not something in our research that we work toward. Instead, we do our occupational analyses and our research studies, and we work with licensees. And what we've heard and been told through our research is that your licensees, or your applicants, I should say, need to take a written test because they need to be assessed on a knowledge of health and safety issues. And that's very important. And there should be a minimum cutoff where those individuals demonstrate a certain level of this knowledge. Then the practical is a very important piece as well, because that is a skill-based test, and that measures some different attributes. Yes, it does still measure sanitation and safety, but it does it in a skill-based format. So over time, through all of our occupational analyses, we've been able to demonstrate that these are two very important assessments that should be maintained with separate cutoff values or passing scores. So I'm always happy to come back if this needs to be agendized, but I just want your board to feel comfortable that you have an excellent track record for meeting Business and Professions Code Section 139. You do your occupational analyses. We evaluate the national exam. We work closely with your board when exam matters come up. Even though you're using the national, we're trying to assist with the passing rates for the Spanish exam and using all of our tools and so forth. So again, I just want your board to feel comfortable that when your exam programs, as far as those go, they're very strong, they're very robust, they've been vetted. The aggregate scoring issue, again, it comes up. I have old memos that I dug out and was sharing with Christy. It comes up periodically. We talk about it, but again, the way your program is structured right now is fair, valid, and legally defensible. So just wanted to make that comment for you to think about as you do your revisions to the Sunset Report. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment at this time? So hearing the public comment to the board, if there's anything that you heard in public comment that you would like to have Christy and our other staff members include in our sunset report, then now's the time to do so.
We required to make a,
Not a motion, but
Are we having an informal communication beyond this
Okay.
board meeting with staff? Is that what we're doing?
Well-
That's allowable?
well, Christy and staff, they can't take the recommendation from the public.
Right.
And so now that we've heard recommendations from the public, then we as a board then make the recommendation to Christy. So if there's anything that you heard in public comment that we haven't already discussed and asked Christy to include and staff to include in our report, then now's the time to do so.
can we hear where we're currently at with what we've? I'm sorry, I'm kind of half hearing, but I also wanted, that was my question too.
Oh, from me?
Yeah, I just want to know where like. Now you're just fooling with me.
So we're going to talk about, Mr. Weeks mentioned some increased definition of our PSP, talking about if they go back to a salon. We want to make sure it's clear. I think we'll talk a little more about PSP as well in our next coming up agenda item. We're going to talk about control or maybe some type of oversight over the apps for the PSP.
There's the
A
registration.
review of the PSP for 2 years.
Before we started on the PSP, there was the student registration.
Yeah, that's on my list still.
Oh, okay, just making sure.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, the review,
Okay, yes, the
2-year.
two-year review. Student registration,
Remove makeup artist language.
removing makeup artist,
Health and safety protocols for PSP.
health and safety protocols. So we'll talk about that in Sunset, but it would actually be regulations, just so we know, but,
Like with a place to start.
right.
And we're also, I guess, saying that the review of the Spanish language pass rate is still going to be reviewed. It looked like the action we were taking was just to keep looking at it. I
Right,
think this
so,
whole concept of how it's scored is going to come up again. And I think if this comes up every 4 to 6 years by new board members coming on board, maybe that's an indication that the public thinks that outside thinking is that maybe something should be definitely looked at in how we score that thing. So, we'll see.
That's why you're going to form the committee.
well, I think there's two different issues that they do go kind of hand in hand, and that's looking further at scoring options, which I am working with Ms. Montez, who talked earlier, as well as NIC, so hopefully we're going to all be having some communications. But then there's that, which is also part of, and then also separately from looking at the Spanish. We were required to do the Spanish report, and we're talking about what we've done so far, and then that we still need to, it can't go off our radar. So that's going to definitely be included as well. Yes.
And so then we also have how many are on webcast, how many views are each meeting, get rid of the acronyms in the report, list that the Health and Safety Nail Collaborative is the association, where we just put association representation, include them by name, list how many translations, how many people were served at DRC and during inspections with with the translation items that we have. And then with the executive summary, we're going to lead with the total size of the licensee population in the first line.
So that's what we have from
us.
the board.
Will be an executive summary.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'd also like to bring up the externship ideas that kind of Fred brought forth about looking at what we have in our regulation in regards to maybe removing some of those requirements, as well as like maybe a to-pay, the prohibition to pay externs. Is that a statute or is that regulation?
We would need a statute change and probably regulations as well. And while I, in theory, agree with that as well, I just want to caution the
I know there's
board.
that externship bill that we're,
That's adding barbers, which is
Okay.
great. And that is, well, you'll hear about that in a minute. My only concern that I must state to the board is the condition of our schools right now. And we are going into accredited schools right now that are not learning labor laws, health and safety laws, and now we're going to put them in salons that we have no tracking of whatsoever. We do not track externs.
but, I mean, I just kind of, not to play devil's advocate on this, but those schools have already been in existence and have been doing that. We just now are deciding to do something about that. So, I mean, I feel like, are we going to be punishing the entire industry just for,
I just need to let the board know what we could be
I see what you're saying.
considering.
Why don't we just give it a minute? Maybe another year to see how this proceeds.
So keep in mind, though, that we have no tracking of externs whatsoever. So we're going to be going into salons, and we are, they're supposed to wear,
They're supposed to wear a badge that says student
Badge.
extern. They're supposed to only basically, they could do like light cleaning. They're not supposed to touch their hands on hair.
Right.
They are basically there for like almost to observe. I still feel though, I mean, the limit of 10% or no more than 8 hours a week, I think I think we should still maybe address those issues because, I mean, then there isn't the school, I believe the salon is supposed to then fill out it's the salon's responsibility then to fill out a evaluation on the student.
But that's between the school and the
The salon,
salon. The
yeah.
board has no
Control.
no control, no oversight
Okay.
over that.
Yeah.
I think
Or-
there's something we can do.
Okay.
Can we do it in the next couple months for Sunset? I don't know. I don't see how we can, I don't think so.
Realistically at the time.
Because I think it could be a complete rehauled program and we could mention it as an option, but I don't know how we could make that happen by then because we would have to know who these externs are. We have to know who they are because we can't be going into salons and everybody saying, I'm an extern. Because we all know that's what would happen.
So I have a question. For Sunset Review, I mean, this is really a summary of two things. This is how I'm understanding what this is really about. It's a summary of what we've done to address issues that were raised in the last Sunset Review. It's also outlining some of the priorities for our board moving forward.
Right.
So that doesn't mean that we can't address externships separately if it's not listed in Sunset Review, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So unless there is something that pressures us to put it into Sunset Review, there's no reason why we can't address it after.
Well, the idea would be the ideas that require statutory change would hopefully get included, but the regulatory change, that's kind of what I'm bringing up. But the regulatory changes, I mean, that can be done whenever we as a board just want to take action on that. So the question then becomes, is there any statutory change that we would like to see added to the Sunset Review in regards to the externship program? At least that's the way I'm interpreting this.
So what would the time frame look like for statutory change if it's not included in Sunset Review?
A few years.
So it definitely would need to be a part of this package if we want to see something change within the next
Right.
few years.
Yeah, I mean, if the board feels strongly about doing something, this is a good opportunity. Sunset Review is always the best opportunity to make statute changes.
Because you're basically guaranteed that some kind of legislation is going to pass in regards to us.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah, well, hopefully, yeah.
Any additional questions, comments, and additions that we'd like to see added to the report based on public comment? Okay, seeing none.
Was there a consensus on externs?
Right.
I'm gonna go with whatever the consensus of our board is in regards to that. So if you guys want to move forward with it, I'm gonna.
Yes. Yes, go ahead.
Fred Jones, PBFC for the record. The main reason why my organization suddenly prioritized externship is it is a direct response to the deregulation talking points that has just been overwhelming me over in the legislature. So that how long it takes you to work that out, to me, is less important than sending a message that this board is looking for ways of reducing the arbitrary barriers to entry. And again, I would contrast externship with apprenticeship. There is very little oversight of apprenticeship. There's a lot of people involved in an externship program. So, but the timing was just, I want your board to send as many clear messages as possible to policymakers that you are being proactive in addressing barriers to entry. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for point of clarity, Joe,
Yeah.
with the externship, with the statutory change, it's because currently externs aren't paid.
Currently, externs are not paid, and that's what I was asking. I believe that's in the statute itself.
And that's what we want to change to
Yeah, that
give salon
basically-
owners that option.
Yes, that was the primary change, and I said everything else can be handled regulatorily.
Yeah.
And so that was my thoughts.
I mean, I agree in order to stay on an offensive position instead of always being like on the defense as things change, and knowing that we have been recently bombarded with the idea of deregulation of our industry, to be able to continue to present to the Senate Rules Committee that we are reducing barriers to entry. If we are able to have a statutory change where salon owners at least have the option of compensating students, then that might assist. So I agree that if we could add some information, just so we have it in there, and based on Christie stating that if we want to see or be able to work towards some statutory change in the future, that it's at least documented.
Why don't you let us take a shot at it?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate the optimism.
Is there any additional, anything additional that we heard in public comment and that we have not heard staff list that we're already going to include in our sunset report? Okay, seeing none, I would like to take a quick 10-minute recess before we get into all of our regulatory conversations. So we'll take a 10-minute recess.
Everybody's copies, we should work through them.
I'm going to call the meeting back to order so we can continue with our agenda. And so now we are on agenda item number 10, where we will be discussing and take some possible action on some proposed bills. So I'm going to defer to Ms. Chrissy Underwood.
All right. I have several updates. I'm just going to go through our list based on our agenda. I will start with AB 767, which was the master business license. The bill's actually been amended and no longer impacts the board.
Boom.
Okay? AB 2134, which is our extern bill, which adds externs to barbers, correct? And community colleges. And that bill has passed through both houses and is enrolled and has been sent to the governor on August 20th. Excuse me, AB 2138. That bill was just amended over the weekend, and you all have a copy. There is copies. Marcine, do you have some extra copies in the back? This is not part of the amendments were not part of our agenda packet, so we did provide some. And it's been amended to, this is our denial bill that we've talked about extensively over the last few months. And it now has been amended that will still allow us to ask the question if on the application if somebody has been convicted of a crime, which is huge, huge hooray win moment for us. We are very happy. So fingerprints are out for, we had thought we were going to go down that direction, but basically none of that process will change for us. There are still other requirements in the bill that we have discussed before, and there still is a fiscal impact. We are still saying that we need at least one position to handle some of the workload that comes with this bill, which is a lot of data reporting and reports to the legislature. But I'll take it. So we currently had an opposed position on this bill. I would recommend that the board change their position to support.
Does this, so that it now, with the new bill, it now allows us to basically still keep our application the same?
Right.
And then then if they do answer yes, there's still the supplemental application, like nothing changes on the.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Nice.
I'll propose that we support the bill.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there any public comment? Not seeing any, I'll call for a vote, starting to my right.
Steve Weeks, support.
Jackie Crabtree, support.
Polly Cardenas, support.
Lisa Tong, support.
Dr. Carrie Williams, support.
Andrew Drapton, support.
Joseph Federico, support.
Okay, so we have officially changed our position to a support position.
We will happily let the authors of that bill know that we are supporting their bill now. One of those authors happens to be the chair of the Sunset Committee for Assembly, so
All right.
make sure that gets known. Our next bill is AB 2775, which is a cosmetic labeling bill. And again, none of these are new. These are all bills we've talked about in the past. And that bill is currently in the Senate, and it was ordered to its third reading, so it looks like it's still moving along through the process. Next bill is SB 715, which was the removal of board members. And that bill no longer impacts the board. It was gutted and amended, now applies to Air Resources Board, so it's out. SB 984, which is board representation regarding a certain number be women, and that is let's see. Oh, it was held under submission in the Appropriations Committee in the Assembly. And SB 1492, which is our bill, and that has passed through both houses and has gone to the governor. And that's just some minor cleanup language on examination paper, since there is no examination paper for an appellant to review. And so that has gone to the governor's office as well.
Cool.
And that's it.
Okay, thank you for those updates. And now we will proceed to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 11, which is discussion and possible action on some proposed regulatory changes. And I will defer back to Chrissy Underwood.
Okay, so in your packets is a memo that kind of goes through all of our regulations, because we have a lot that we're working on in our office. So the following are currently being reviewed by the Department of Consumer Affairs, and that's our definition of access, our transfer of credit, our translation guides, as well as our fine schedule and our payment plans. Health and safety regulations, we're still working on those packages, so the board will hopefully be seeing those, probably not at the next meeting, but probably the meeting after that. And then we have our action items. So in your packet is the updated language based on the last meeting that we had on the personal service permit. I'm sure nobody has any comments on that, so.
Let's move along.
So you do have your proposed draft language in your packets. At our last meeting, we were asked to bring back proposed regulatory language. So should the board approve this regulatory language today, we would then be able to start the regulatory process.
Can, what we just put into the sunset review, can we incorporate that into this? I mean, are we just having to vote on this as it stands right now, or can we make those few suggestions as part of this?
We would have to make that suggestion very specific here today, right? Because we don't want to have to bring the language back to be reapproved. So if we have something that we want to put specifically in regulations, we would just have to hash that out now.
Can I ask a quick question? So, personal service permit A1, where it says the applicant licensed by the board has held a valid license for a minimum of 2 years, which I know we discussed last time, or has been licensed in another state and is eligible for license, is that doesn't have a 2-year requirement either?
That would be like
Or do they have
They-
to have a license for 2 years to be
They have
eligible?
to be licensed
Just more
3 of
double-
the last 5.
Wanted to double check. Okay.
So can you look at?
Is this where we would change the definition of a PSP to be more specific as it relates to establishments?
I think the definition is in statute. One sec. Do you have it? Right, so the statute reads, for purposes of this section, a personal service permit means a permit that authorizes an individual to perform services for which he or she holds a license pursuant to this chapter outside of an establishment as defined by Section 7346 in accordance with the regulations established by the board. So the definition of a PSP is in statute.
How can we modify, because it still sounds so vague to me, say outside of an establishment. Does that mean that they are not subject to the laws of establishment licensing that we are doing, but they can try and defend themselves by saying, well, this is outside the establishment, so I can do this? And if that's part of that, is there somewhere else we could place this restrictive language on the definition?
I think it depends on what kind of restrictions or how you're trying to carve out further defining what's generally listed in statute, because we can accomplish that in a regulation to put down the requirements. Well, this is what it means. So you're just defining and further explaining what is listed as the definition in statute. So it just depends. What are you trying to carve out? How are you trying to make this look, or what are the restrictions in terms of locations, or are you trying to restrict the number of places, or they can't do it at a facility they own, or they somehow have some financial interest? Those kinds of restrictions you can put in a regulation, and that doesn't have to be in your sunset review report because you're not requesting some sort of statutory change.
So that's something we wouldn't act on now on this revised draft, if we wanted to add a regulation in there, or we would want to put that through now?
Yeah, in the regs. Yeah, this is what
So
we're
we
talking
could, we
about.
would add it to this.
We would add it, okay. Should I propose one? And maybe board members could jump in? Oh, okay. Okay. So there's the statute. So I would propose that, that the PSP license holder may only operate at a customer location. PSP licensee may not act in any way as an establishment licensee with a fixed location serving multiple customers. So if you could start with that and maybe add anything else that board members want to add to that? Yeah, here we go.
I want to keep that license, actually.
This is someone who performs limited barbering cosmetology service outside of a licensed establishment, we're using as our short definition of a PSP holder. I would add to that, only at a customer location, comma, PSP licensee may not act in any way as an establishment licensee, comma, with a fixed location serving multiple customers. All right, here we go.
Are you looking at the proposed regs right now?
I'm looking
Or
at,
just in general?
I'm looking at the revised draft before the other.
Okay.
And where our short form definition of a PSP holder is someone who performs limited barbering and cosmetology services outside of a licensed establishment.
Got it.
I would add to that, only at a customer location, period. PSP licensee may not act in any way as an establishment licensee, comma, with a fixed location serving multiple customers. Obviously, I just don't want this to come around and bite our establishments. Suddenly, there's a lot of illegal activity and illegal establishments propping up. So there's the logic behind it.
Okay, so the section of regulations in our first paragraph A would read, "The board may issue a personal service permit authorizing the holder of a permit to perform limited barbering and cosmetology services outside of a licensed establishment, only at a customer location."
Right.
Sound right? Does that, what do you?
There's only at a customer location, period.
Yeah, period.
And then new sentence, PS.
New sentence, a PSP license holder
Right.
may not act as an establishment license at a fixed location. I'm sorry?
Serving multiple customers is at the end of that.
Right. Define that. It's going to come down to what they interpret establishment as being, a formal licensee of the board or their right as a business person to have an establishment.
Well, we define an establishment, so we can just say as defined. Yeah.
This permit doesn't allow you to be an establishment.
Right.
Just for background, under B&P Section 7346 defines establishment to mean any premises, building, or part of a building where any activity licensed under this chapter is practiced. Establishment also includes any premises, building, or part of a building in which natural hairstyling is practiced for compensation.
An establishment, by that definition, could be someone's home if there is a PSP holder in their house.
That's different, though.
We have a separate regulation for home salons, a separate statute for home salons.
So basically, if they were operating in their home, they would be in violation of that in-home establishment regulation. Or if they were operating in a specific location multiple times, serving multiple customers, that would then put them into the realm of unlicensed activity?
Yes.
Okay.
But a naive question, this is how would we enforce that if they have a PSP license?
Well, I mean, we
I guess
face
if-
that now.
If somebody complained.
Right.
We'd still
Right.
be able to go to the location and inspect and find that it's.
We do go to
unlicensed
homes.
activity
We go to
under
homes all the
that.
time. I mean, a lot of very well-run salons are out of homes. They do it right.
It's just that under this license, I mean, it's going to be difficult to go in a home, wouldn't it? I mean, our inspector, first of all, they have to know that the procedure is going to happen, which we don't have knowledge of that either. But then they knock on the door, go into the home where they're being, in the middle of a procedure, their bathroom or their kitchen, wherever it is, and do a general inspection of what?
No, a home salon is an actual salon. So, but if it's a PSP in a home, we wouldn't inspect.
Right.
Unless
If-
we got a.
If we got a
consumer-
complaint that someone's working out of their home, we get those today, and we would go knock on the door.
Okay. Looking for an illegal establishment.
Exactly. Because they have to have a separate entrance.
Right, right, right. So where are we at the definition?
So we could say, services outside of a licensed establishment only at a consumer location.
Only at a consumer location, right?
Period. Okay, so everybody agrees with that?
No,
Okay?
because I just, it's more grammatically, I don't, because basically A is saying, if the following conditions are met, what are we going to put in front of that?
Would it be easier if we just added a section that says,
I think it'd be better to add a section,
add a section that says a PSP holder
may not.
may not
or whatever.
act as a establishment,
An establishment licensee.
right. We would add H. What'd you say?
Would it be actually,
Right.
there's a typo, yeah.
2 Gs.
There's two Gs. So we need to correct the G to an H and add an I.
Yes.
I. So could we say a PSP holder shall not operate out of a single location unless the location is licensed as an establishment, according to section, how's that?
I think so. And the other thing we might want to look at is one of our Gs. The first,
The actual
the G1, when it talks about disposable tools and rules and regulations, how can we address that the board will establish new protocols for health and safety for PSP licensees? How do we do that? Because they aren't going to meet these tests necessarily.
My response to that would be if you want to create separate, focused only on the PSP permit holder, you're going to have to develop that and put it through in conjunction with this regulation.
Obviously, we don't have the time to develop that at this meeting.
But if it's
So,
separate
let's
regulation,
just
I don't
start.
think,
Hey,
I
okay.
mean,
No,
it won't
we
be-
can't obviously do that here. Can we make reference to it that it's,
Well, not in regulation, but we can when we talk about what we're doing with PSP and Sunset. And then that's certainly something we can start working on.
or one of our committees to begin at the board committee level and move out? Okay, just as long as we, because we're telling them something right here that can't be done. I mean, they can't do they can't do the public service, the protection that's necessary in an establishment that an establishment does. They just can't do it. So we have to move relatively fast with that, I would assume.
Any thoughts? Well, that's true. Right.
So I just had a question. Out of all of the services that we listed, which, can we identify which ones would actually be impacted and would require separate regulations?
Yes, I think that's what we need to take some time to look at.
Because it does seem that a majority, not being a licensee myself, I'm just looking at, majority of these would be using disposable tools in general. So it looks like it might just be a few that require something specific for PSP holders. Am I correct? License?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so too, but I know you all are going to not agree with me, but I'm still going to put it out here. We should just tie it to a brick and mortar, so then all of this can be regulated. Hi, we don't have to do what, the apps are telling us to do. We can tie it to brick and mortar, and then a lot of this would be. That's what I'm saying, 100%.
I'm just going to say, just generally speaking, as a stylist, going somewhere, my equipment is not disposable. My shears are not disposable. My combs and brushes, my blow dryers, my clippers, they are not disposable. So that doesn't fall. There's absolutely nothing I would take to a home that would be disposable, other than the hair that hits the floor.
I would say from first glance, looking at the list, of the services that we approved, I mean, shears, clippers, tweezers, and any heat styling tools. I know that within regulation, we're able to spray down our shears now. They don't have to be immersed.
Right.
And so I'm thinking when it comes to at least the disinfection portion, as Lisa stated, a number of the items already have to be disposed of, especially for the manicuring services. Looking at the aesthetic services, I know a number of these services are done using the hands. Yes.
Could we, okay, this is just, I'm throwing it out there. Could we make a list of a type of a kit that we can, I don't know, that they are required to carry with them, like you said, the spray disinfectant, that they are required to be with them at all times if they're going out?
Well-
I thought I had a voice. I don't know if you can all hear me out there? Okay. Could we set up a list of things that are required for them to go out into the field? So that they, because like Mr. Weeks was saying, that they're not going to carry their tub of disinfectant. Well, you can, get around some of that by using the, sprays and what have yous. Maybe we can require something of them if they choose to have this license, that they have to follow, by having these products. I don't know.
But
I'm
then,
just-
I'm just gonna, is it our responsibility to basically dictate, like, the state board already sets the rules for disinfection and sanitation. You're basically just telling them again what they need for
Right.
disinfection and sanitation. In addition, it's like, who's gonna ever check the kit anyway, and how are they gonna be susceptible to examinations of these kits?
Right.
So I feel like it's just creating a needless,
into this circle.
regulation that no one's gonna check anyway. So.
Okay.
Unless it was tied to a brick and mortar.
Yeah, and then wait, and I agree with you being tied to a brick and mortar, but the issue becomes, the whole purpose of this PSP is to create a freelance license, correct? And if you basically just look at any dictionary definition of freelance, you can't tie it to a brick and mortar, because a freelance is someone who goes off and works for their own. And so, once again, we're.
With this, you guys, seriously, if we're going to create this freelance licensing, we have a new law that came out, the ABC, with, that you can't be an independent contractor. So this is insane. Yes, here's your license, you can go be an independent contractor on top of it. But if you're working for this app company, that's their business, right? And they're creating those clients. So they're, like Uber, sending you out to these people to do these services. You're an employee. You're not an independent contractor.
I think if we focus too much on the apps, we're forgetting about the segment of the licensee population that just may have a salon suite, and, they have clients who say, hey, can you come to my office? I can't come to your salon today. There are a lot of licensees are working independently and are establishment owners in the salon suite model. And so, yes, we have these apps. And I know there are probably a number of people who are working with them, but I think we have to remember there are a number of licensees who are very much focused on their immediate area, and may want the freedom, more than likely, as we've discussed in other meetings, are doing this right now. And now we're just saying, okay,
But then that person would be tied to a brick and mortar. Because they have their
they have an establishment license, right. And I think in looking at what we have here and knowing we're trying to really pin down the disinfection aspect, because we've limited the services, because we're saying that this PSP holder has to have at least 2 years in the industry, when we look at how these items should be disinfected, again, I'm identifying outside of like the electrical tools, the non-electrical tools being shears and tweezers. If we have this sentence that you shall follow the laws and rules of the regulations of the board, I think tweezers still have to be immersed. Do they? Right, they have to be immersed. So I think if anything, we might need to discuss how that is disinfected, but, the shears, right now, if you're.
We're just talking about hair, though. What about when we go down to the nail and whatnot?
Looking at the services, those look like disposable items.
But isn't the issue that they need to be following all the health and safety regulations as applicable?
That's applicable.
We have to define what's applicable, though, don't we? I agree, we have no control of this.
Yeah, I don't.
And we may be setting something loose here that we can't specifically inspect and know that it's being done, but maybe we aren't doing our job as well as we could by at least saying, these are our standards, and these are our standards for this licensee, for health and safety of the general public. Do it.
Are you saying they
And
should
do
be
it as far as it goes, probably.
more restrictive than non-establishment health and safety?
I would say that
If
it
we're
would just
holding
be.
everybody to the same standard, it doesn't matter what
Exactly, but our people aren't going to, have a trash container, and they aren't and travel with that. They aren't going to have a towel container of soiled towels and fresh towels. So the same regulations that we apply to the establishments can't exactly be applied to the PSP. Not two separate standards I'm interested in, but just enough to know that the public is being taken care of if, in fact, this licensee follow board regulations. And whether they do, it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, I think we're coming up against the issues that we've been having and the struggle of even having to, like, being forced to do something about this PSP, because I know all of our concerns have always been, how are we going to enforce it? And so I just feel it's coming right back to the conversation that we've been having, and I think it's really, really important that because we have this language, I know in our last meeting with this new draft, we had agreed that, it wasn't unanimous, right? But the majority had agreed that the revisions, that we agreed with the revisions, that where we are now with the PSP license, we know that we're not going to be able to do the enforcement of it. Like, we know we can't go into the home. We know that with them being freelance, the best thing that we're going to have to do is what we discussed in the last meeting, which is really educating the consumer and making sure that they're aware of and what they should be looking for when someone comes into their home or into their place of work. And yeah.
I understand we were talking about this being for freelance people, and you were stating most people were gonna, come from their suites. Why are we opposed then of just putting in brick and mortar?
Well, I was giving an example of that everyone who might apply for the PSP may not only be using an app, and I was just identifying another segment of the licensee population, but there may also be licensees who don't have a suite, but have a license. When we look at the stats that we have, there are a number of people who just manage their licenses. And if these individuals have an active license and this PSP comes out and they're like, hey, I'm a manicurist and I'm also a waitress, but now I can take my manicurist license and go and serve people. You may still have those licensees because we have a large number of licensees who have an active license but aren't actively practicing. And this may be an option for those people who maintain their license and are like, hey, I can use it now without having to have the overhead of a suite or be in a salon. So I'm just thinking about all the different licensees that may be out there that may take advantage of this, but we're still dealing with the issue of how do we enforce it, how do we make sure, and I think that's the struggle that I even have, being a licensee and understanding the importance of health and safety and having had employees and all those things. But then in finding the balance and knowing that now we're here at this place, and I know that I did agree with the language, knowing that the industry is really crying out and demanding it, and then looking at the shift in just society as a whole. Again, we're in this on-demand society, and it's just where we're moving towards, and we don't want to constantly be on the defense, and when we're, right. So, I'm just sharing, I agree.
And I agree. I'm not against people going out and doing these things. I just think, we have to regulate it. So
Right.
at least with a brick and mortar, they've got something. I understand, we can't satisfy everybody,
Yeah.
right? We can't satisfy these people who don't want to work in an establishment and just want their freedom. Well, we all do. But where do we got to pick a lane
Yeah.
and do something where we're regulating something.
Unfortunately, I think we're in a situation where we have to allow things to happen, allow things to go wrong, and then point out to lawmakers that, see, this is the unintended consequences of your action, and do corrective action as opposed to trying to fix it on the front end.
But we don't want to set up our licensees at the same end. If this were to become law today, and tomorrow I called a PSP person out to my house to perform a service on me.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I got some sort of blood disease problem that I blamed on the licensee that came out. And if I were going to litigate against that licensee, the first thing my attorney would look at is, well, is this PSP licensee following all the laws, rules, and regulations regarding cosmetology or barbering or whatever it was that were out there? And if you line those regulations up with how the service was most likely performed in my house, I would prevail. I mean, because you can't possibly do all that's required in the regs in a house. So it's just shortening that list or compromising in some respects, so at least we have, coverage on the health and safety issue. We don't want to set up our people for disaster.
I agree, and I think in our sunset review report, where we want to add that in 2 years, we kind of come back and look at the PSP and do an evaluation of it, that may help. I think it is constructive to think about the possibilities, but I also don't want us to get too caught up and get so far away that we're unable to move off of this spot that we keep coming back to. Like, at some point, we're going to have to, as Andrew said, like, let it happen and then see actually, like, once it's in effect. Yeah, see actually how does it impact our licensees, how does it impact the public. Do our best on the front end as we're doing, but that enforcement issue is going to be difficult at this, as we're finding at this stage, to really see how it's going to work until it's out in the real world. And we see what complaints, if any, we get.
Right. I mean, I have all of the same concerns, but, I think Tammy mentioned earlier in her conversations with other states that already have implemented this. It doesn't seem like there has been health and safety complaints, consumer complaints. Whether that's because consumers don't know to complain because something happened or what the particular reason might be, I think that's something to take into consideration. I'm wondering within the language of G1, which states, that a PSP holder shall follow all those laws, rules, and regulations, would it be helpful for us to clearly state that they must follow all health and safety laws and regulations that equally apply to establishments? And I understand what you're saying, how would they be able to follow a lot of that? But in my mind, if that is clearly stated, they would have to do the extra work of carrying a trash can or carrying a container, whether it be in their car or some type of mobile cart or whatever that they bring with them, to put their dirty towel and smock in. And they would still be required to follow all of those laws, but it would be incumbent on them to find the applicable solution for them, similar to how we don't dictate establishments what type of cabinet or what type of container to use. They simply need to label and provide everything in a container. I don't know if that's impossible. The licensees would know best.
I would agree, that does make sense. I think what it'll do, it'll make someone think twice
Right.
about a PSP licensee on its own, knowing that you have to engage all of our health and safety protocols in order to go out there. It's not just simple as throw some scissors in the car and head out.
Well,
It's
it
going
says
to be more significant.
I mean, G1, as we're lovingly referring to it now, says a PSP holder shall follow all laws, rules, regulations governing the practice for which the PSP holder is licensed by the board. I mean, isn't that the implied, I mean, it's implied there that you're following the health and safety rules. To call it out, I feel like would just be redundant. Because even the sentence before is already speaking to health and safety practices. So, I mean, I don't know where, I mean, other than trying to make us feel better, I don't know what other purpose it's going to do by adding just kind of some additional language into that.
Tammy, when DC, when you talk to them about theirs, do they, Washington State. Do they, in their language, is it tied to brick and mortar, or is it just anybody can get it?
It's not tied to brick and mortar, if I recall correctly. It's been quite a while, but I think it was completely freelance. And that's what they call their license, a freelance license.
And is that what we're gonna call ours?
No, it's called a PSP.
It's called a PSP. Oh, okay. So the PSP is the technical, I just thought PSP was the term that we were using, but in reality, it's like when they go after, okay.
I don't want to move away from this particular conversation, but before I forget, I just wanted to suggest that since we are going to talk about reviewing this within 2 years, would it be possible for us to collect data in terms of whether or not they are tied, if they are employees of an establishment, or if they are individual licensee holders, or whether or not they work for an app?
I think we could ask that on the application initially, but,
I get my license and then I sign up for.
right, right.
Do it myself, let me just get that.
And then I'm not doing it anymore,
'Cause I'm
and then I'm doing it
both. I
again.
mean,
Or I'm
working-
doing
getting jobs
both,
from the app,
yeah.
But I'm getting odd jobs from Craigslist. I mean, it's.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't make it a requirement. It's just for data collection purposes, since I think all of us have that question of who are these people who are going to sign up for PSPs? Who are they right now? And then we can also use that information to reevaluate whether we want to make any changes to PSP down the line.
I'm echoing what you're saying over there, Lisa, which is that it's, I think what we have is, as Steve kind of brought up earlier with, during Sunset, is that, we should readdress this in 2 years. And honestly, I feel in our last meeting, we kind of, for all intents and purposes, made the sausage, and kind of this was what came out the other end. And I think at this point in time, the only things that we can do is look at kind of like what kind of things we can report on or follow up on within these 2 years that doesn't make it unduly burdensome on the PSP holders, but that we have enough information to collect information as we move forward. Then in 2 years, we assess all that information and see actually, is the PSP the big bag boogeyman that we're making it out to be today?
And it might get revised another way. We might say we don't need to require 2 years for a licensee. We might say there has been no harm, let's make it 1 year, or let's go full bore. I don't know.
I kind of support what Lisa was saying, but maybe we can do it in the application for their PSP license. Maybe we can just state it there. Is it going to change? Is it going to be in flux? They'll make changes, but at least from a marketing perspective, we know on the front end how many establishment employees right now are thinking about doing this, how many people that are working with an app company. It'll give us rough upfront ideas, because right now, we know nothing about this market,
Well, and then in addition.
other than it's illegal.
Yeah, I totally agree. I agree that we can add that right up front.
Well, in addition, the PSP is for 2 years, correct? So basically, if we're doing a 2-year summary, all we're gonna really have is one generation of PSP holders to basically, of information to go back on. We're not gonna be able to see if their values changed, the demographics or the values have changed on their application from their initial versus the renewal. You're only gonna really see one data set.
Right.
One last thing on G1, and it's really minor. I think there's an extra space between shall and follow. I don't know whether that can be fixed or not.
I also wanted to ask about, I know in previous meetings, the suggestion had been made that the licensee must be in good standing. And I don't see that anywhere in the RPSP. And I don't know how we would define in good standing, but if it's possible, it might
suspension.
be something for us to add in.
Valid. We have it as that they, well, what would you consider good standing?
I knew that question was coming. But
Outstanding violation?
We have it as a valid license.
right, because I know that the comments have come up before that if this licensee has had a history of health and safety violations, we should not be issuing them a PSP. I don't know if that needs to be in statute or regulation or just a consideration we apply when we review applications, but I do think it should be made clear.
I think, and Michael might be able to help, that if we're going to make decisions based on if we issue a PSP on someone's citation history, that has to be in regulation. And I mean, we'd have to set parameters for that. Like, what's a pattern?
Right.
Is it a pattern of one used buffer, or is it a pattern of a used buffer, dirty nippers, bad tool, all, you know?
Can you say something as, has no upheld DRC? I don't want to use the word convictions over for the past 2 years or something like that.
No revocation of licenses, something deeper in this process.
Well, if they've held the valid license for 2 years, even if they got it revoked 14 years ago, I think they would still,
Because it's a valid license.
it's a valid license, we've given them the license.
Well, we have in here not subject to denial, so that leads into like convictions and situations like that. But I think that it would be very hard, I think, to make a decision based on violations, because what if you could go into a salon today and somebody's label fell off their drawer, and that's a violation, and then do we go back a year, and then they had a violation of one towel left on their counter. So those are not really in our consumer harm where we would follow up on things like that. We have a lot of violations that are labeling requirements or, still a violation, but not as bad as a dirty foot spa. So where do we draw the line?
This wouldn't be jaywalking type of violations we would want to define as that. The minor stuff, we can kick out of that. It would just be the tougher level of violation. Are you in status of your license currently? Has it been revoked, and are you on probation? And, harsher sort of things like that could be a reason for denial.
What about just like no outstanding fines? Because if you fined, you paid, or you got it dismissed because it was a towel thing and DRC decided, all right, we've talked with you, you understand what you did wrong, we're not going to fine you, kind of thing. Or if you do pay your fine, you've paid your fine and acknowledged you've done wrong. And then, but it's not a denial, once the, like, let's just say you're fined, but you haven't had your DRC hearing yet. Your application for permit is just held until that matter is either cleared up or.
Would this be just put into our definition of denial, the board's definition of denial of license, the ability to deny a license, or would it absolutely have to be a statute?
I think, Chrissy, you're saying it has to be a regulation. It has to be in regulation if we want to add additional.
Yes.
So how does everyone feel about adding language similar to what Andrew said about having outstanding fines as far as determining what is a license in good standing? Going back to what Lisa initially brought up. Everyone?
I'm sorry, could you?
I'm sorry. I was just asking just a general consensus from the board. I know Lisa brought up trying to define what is a license in good standing, and Andrew gave the suggestion of no outstanding fines. Understanding that some of the other suggestions, may be a little bit, require more work.
Specificity.
Yes, but
Tammy
outstanding
found it.
fines may be something. Do you think, Chrissy?
Well, we do have a regulation for externs. When we're talking about good standing, and we actually define good standing, meaning the licensee maintains a valid current barber, cosmetology, esthetician, or manicurist license issued by the board. There is no current pending discipline against the license pursuant to Article 11, and the licensee has no unpaid fines issued to Article 12 under
Would
our
a copy of that? That would be totally.
I guess the question would become, I mean, I agree, I'd like that, but what if somebody applies when they do have, they haven't had their DRC hearing yet? Are they able to just like put the application on pause until the matter is cleared up, or do they get denied and therefore reapply once the matter
It's an
is
unpaid
cleared up.
fine. It's an unpaid fine until it goes through the process, so they wouldn't be able to get it until that process is done.
But it's not, is it denied then? And therefore they'd have to reapply and refile? and
No,
re-
we
or
wouldn't
is just
deny it.
put on
We would
pause?
send them a deficiency letter.
So,
So
okay.
Carrie, Miss Harris, she, I think has,
Oh, is she, she's almost on vacation, so. Come on up, Carrie. It is her realm anyways.
Well, it's not public, it's staff.
yes, help us, Carrie.
If somebody's appealed,
Well,
if somebody's
she's gonna
appealed a
clar-
violation, they're not really considered charged with that violation, so they would be approved. If the fine is not due yet, past due, they would be approved. If the fine is outstanding, past their due date, they would not be approved. Those are our current guidelines.
So you could get if we went with this, you could get a
Yes.
permit and then be fined, and then you might still want to take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. I mean, well, we don't go to the Supreme Court, but, and still have your permit and still practice with that fine on your record.
It sounds like it would be,
Not on your record until after a decision's been made from appeal.
Okay.
so it sounds like what would happen right now as a licensee, like if I needed to renew my license.
Right.
And I can still practice, it's just that once the decision is made, then now I owe a fine,
Right.
but it doesn't take away my license.
Right.
Yeah, but you can still practice inside somebody's home as opposed to somewhere it could be inspected.
But the difference, just as we are getting, they do have to still go through the background check as well. So there is that other level of checking the PSPs. They have to have a clear background,
Because they're going into people's homes.
Right.
Or private
which we
spaces.
don't do for our licensees working in salons.
I will make a motion that we adopt the language from the externship.
So I think we have a few languages.
Oh. Well, all
Let
right,
me-
I was,
Go ahead.
all right, my initial motion was to adopt I think this would be going in on section A1, would be the externship language for.
Good
you know,
standing.
Good standing. I think we have another, I don't know if we need to change the lettering and make an H and H and.
I don't think
and-
so.
And I don't know, did we actually add an I, or
We are adding an I
you're adding an I?
that states a PSP holder shall not operate out of a single location unless the location is licensed in accordance to section 7346.
All right, I'll add that to my motion. I don't know if I need to add my typo space to the motion.
We already fixed it
We already fixed it.
in our heads.
I think that's my motion.
I second that motion. So there's a motion on the floor, and now we will open up for public comment. I think there's some of the regulations that we're going over today, we are voting on, correct, Christie?
Well,
Unless,
other than PSP,
uh-huh,
we have one more.
So this one- okay.
But this will we're just gonna do a motion on for each of them.
okay.
Hi, Laura Embleton. I'm with ASCP, and we've got about 4,500 members here in California. It's nice to see you guys again. Again, there are so many people that are practicing. I mean, I've had my hair cut in a friend's house before in her kitchen, and it didn't occur to me, because that was 10 years ago, that all of this had to happen while I was there, and it was also in Colorado, so whatever. But, like, I'm thinking that probably happens a lot here, that people are doing that. So the question is, do we just want to let those guys do it and know it's illegal and it's happening according to the regulations and the laws that y'all have? Or do you want to kind of try to make it broader to kind of capture them all so you know what's going on? Like, not that you could do anything about it, but you just kind of know what's happening. So that, I'm just throwing that out for your consideration. With regards to the estheticians, basically what you've done in E on what they can do is just wash somebody's face. And estheticians do so much more than just like cleaning face and applying cream. So we would ask that you would consider allowing waxing, because that's happening. People are going out and doing waxes in the course of what an esthetician can do with the PSP. Also lash extensions, and then different things like sugaring and threading and different things like that. Because, I mean, like what it is now, it's so limited on what estheticians can do pursuant to this E section here, so. I would ask that you kind of grow that out a little bit. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Jamie Strawbeck, Precision Nails. You think that's limited? Look at what manicurists would be allowed to do. There's a workaround that we're not even really addressing, and that's 7318, where, as your regulations state now, we're able to serve people in their homes if there's some illness or physical or mental incapacitation, which has never been defined. I could argue that a migraine, a hangover, any number of things could be a physical or mental incapacitation. And as a provider of services, I could say, I could do whatever I'm licensed to do in an establishment at your home. I'm just gonna say that you were incapacitated. So we have not dealt with that issue at all. We haven't defined that. But as it pertains to section, let's see, F, where we are defining what manicurists are allowed to do, if you're gonna allow them to apply polish, they have to be able to remove it. So removal should be there. That's without even expanding the scope. And do we mean polish, like traditional polish, or do we mean gel polish? Because then that's equipment. And most people are drilling that off, not filing it off or soaking it off. What about trimming and shaping the nails? That's a really basic thing that we do that would require tools. And massaging, I don't think there's much risk in allowing manicurists to do the massage that they're allowed to do in an establishment, which is that scope of practice of elbow to fingertips, knees to toes in someone's home. I don't think that there's any risk there. Your section I, where you're thinking of adding the wording about a single location, I think you need to say something about like either exclusively or predominantly or solely, because everywhere you go is going to be some location. It could be someone's home, it could be a park, it could be a hotel, it could be a care facility, it could be just about anything. So I think maybe that needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. And there's something else I want to address, and that is cities are going to lose out on tax revenue. Because if you are traveling around and you're providing your services in 5 different cities that happen to be surrounding your city, and you are not licensed to provide business services in that municipality, how are they going to collect taxes from you on what you're doing? And they should be able to, because you are directly competing against, again, those brick and mortar establishments. I could make a drinking game out of that, Jackie. I'd be drunk by now, but I think that's something that we need to consider in terms of the health of the communities that are being served. Because while the apps are supposed to be making it convenient for consumers to get services in a location that's convenient for them, not convenient for the service provider, convenient for the consumer, it also has to honor the fact that it is actually a business, money is being exchanged, and the cities are going to lose out. And I think that's something that's not even, we haven't even addressed that. I brought it up before, but that's been a long time ago. I'm bringing it up again. So thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy Cochran, California Estheticians. Thank you for bringing up in good standing. And I understand that there's a lot of parameters that you can consider when you have to decide if somebody is in good standing. I mean, how often do you actually yank somebody's license and revoke it? It doesn't happen that often. You don't revoke licenses for labels that fall off, or you forgot to cover your wax pot when the inspector came in and that sort of thing. There are things like dirty tools and working outside of scope of practice that are definitely something. And to Ms. Harris's point, what is the lifespan of, between having the inspection, getting cite and fine to make a ruling, you appealing it, and then getting to a DRC, and then where do you hit in that 2 years of when you get your PSP and when you do your license renewal? that seems like that could be 3 years. So I could have, corrected myself and not known I can do lash extensions or do some sort of perming situation, but by the time everything rolls through, that's like more than a year or so by the time I actually pay my fine, because I've lost my appeal. So I don't know what that lifespan is for in good standing, but it definitely needs to be considered. In section E, basically I can show up and do somebody's night routine as an esthetician. I can wash your face. I can't use a washcloth to exfoliate you. I can put some cream on, and that's about it. What's missing from there, so you say that you can't use tools for exfoliation purposes, but that doesn't restrict you from using infusion devices, oxygen facials, LEDs, and things like that. Those are all very important things that we carry with us in our establishments and what we do as professionals that are above and beyond a general home care routine for someone. So that's something to consider. And two of the biggest services are completely disallowed here. Lash extensions and hair removal, basically. I can't do a good brow service without waxing, without trimming, without sugaring, without threading. Threading and sugaring are two forms of hair removal that are completely disallowed, and they don't have heat, and they don't have a lot of the same issues that you have with burns and things like that. So sugaring and threading should be something that could be considered as safe practices.
So we couldn't even put that in there.
Okay, so you can't even do that? But even as a licensee, if I'm an establishment, I have to have a license to provide threading services, right, in an establishment?
No.
I can be unlicensed and working in an establishment? Okay. So those are two options that you would consider, but we don't need to be licensed to do the threading. But sugaring is not hot. It's literally caramel. It's sugar, water, and lemon, and you're removing hair in that manner. And it doesn't have sticks, it doesn't have pollen, it doesn't have anything. You take that ball, you wrap it up in your glove, and you throw it out in the trash. And this is something that is being practiced. It's been practiced for thousands of years culturally, and it is a very safe form of hair removal. Does not involve heat. So other than if you leave it in your car, it's probably not going to be great for you when you're traveling around without a business permit in every city you're doing your business in. But those are some of the considerations. And again, I agree with the business licenses when you're running around town. Maybe you live in Irvine and you have a business license for the city of Irvine, and that's your scope of who you're going to go and see. But a lot of people live in smaller towns, or they're willing to go outside of their smaller town to another town to make money, and there's no business license involved. So thank you very much for your consideration of adding sugaring to the language for this case.
Thank you.
Hello, Fred Jones, PBFC. I'm still with the brick and mortar. I think that's the silver bullet to resolve a lot of the concerns that you're just not going to be able to resolve any other way. But you've had a pretty clear message delivered by a very important legislator, so I understand if you go forward. One of the, again, benefits of a brick and mortar, though, is you have a partner, someone you can hold responsible for the behavior and actions of the employees or those within the establishment. I think we're missing the other half of the equation. Why has this come to you in the first place? Apps, right? There is a potential partner that you can put some onus upon, just like you do currently with establishments, because there are requirements on establishments that aren't on booth renters. So salons are a partner for you in making sure folks are protected. Because let's face it, the only protection consumers are going to have with a PSP is with a trial attorney after they're hurt. But everything you do with establishments are to prevent the harm in advance. So I would suggest you look at addressing commercial enterprises that facilitate personal service permit services. At the very least, require them to maintain a registry of who their PSPs are. Because that will at least require the apps to make sure that their stylists or manicurists have a bona fide PSP. So there is a way you can partner with the apps. Because people could start doing things with apps without ever getting a PSP. It's called reality today. They are doing that now, so it's not an if, it is. So why don't you put some onus on commercial enterprises that are making money off of this to at least do something to partner with you? And I think that something should at least be that they're in some way verifying that each and every one of their contractors have a PSP issued by your board. Secondly, and this is to Ms. Tong, you mentioned the 2-year review. Will that be an automatic sunset, or will it just be in 2 years we'll look at it again? And the reason, there's a big difference between those two. One is on autopilot. The other is it will force whomever is sitting in your seat in 2 years to actually look at what's happening to PSP. And if they don't approve the continuation, it goes away. So I would suggest, don't have a review in 2 years, have a sunset in 2 years. Thank you.
Is there any additional public comment at this time? Okay, not seeing any additional public comment, I want to now ask my fellow board members, based on the public comment, we currently have a motion. So I think we should have Andrew, do you remember your motion? Because there were a lot of suggestions and conversation.
She remembers
Oh,
my
okay.
motion because it was such
So
a
we're going
brilliant
to restate
one.
the motion, because there was a lot of discussion that just happened.
So the motion is to add to Section A the same definition of good standing that we have currently in our extern language, and to add an I, which will say a PSP holder shall not operate out of a single location unless that location is licensed in accordance with Section 7346.
Okay, so we currently have a motion on the floor. And so I'll call for a vote, or let me ask Christy, because there was a number of public comment.
It's up to the board.
Well, let me ask the board, are there any amendments anyone would like to make to the motion based on the conversation we just had?
What do you think about putting some responsibility on other companies, like Fred Jones was saying?
Well, in our sunset conversation, it came up in our sunset conversation for our report that we definitely want to make sure we're working with the apps, and there will be some level of, Chrissy, if you could.
Yeah, I think we're going to mention it, that it's something we can consider. I don't know that that's not something for this regulation. That's something we would need statutory authority to do. And then I think by asking, at least initially up front, because we really don't know what we're doing, I personally think the bigger holders of PSPs are individuals, are not from the apps, but I could be wrong. But we had a lot of people calling us that did not have anything to do with the apps, that are doing it on their own right now. So if we ask them up front, we'll at least start getting an idea of who our people are. But it's a statutory requirement that we would need if we wanted to add that oversight.
At one point, wasn't there a geographic radius of service limitation that we had, like 50 miles or something? Is that in place still?
That was taken out at the last meeting.
Yeah, it was just my understanding that at the last meeting, we had a representative, a CEO of one of the apps, who actually stated that she agreed with all of the language and that they actually wanted to be a partner with the board to ensure that everyone was licensed, that they actually have reminders set up for the individual licensing right now, and they actively check to make sure that everyone they hire is actually licensed. So I don't think it's an issue to actually work with the apps I think they already have what Mr. Jones referenced, which is a registry. I think just based on who attended the last meeting, it seemed like they were ready to jump on board and get everyone that they have hired to have a PSP. So I think the apps are, in my opinion, the least of our concerns because I think the apps want to be in good standing. My concern is kind of what Christy stated, is that it seems like there's a lot of people who are interested in doing this that are not associated with apps, who are going to be doing it on their own, who have been doing it on their own, and may or may not understand that they need a PSP license. Those are the folks that I'm more concerned about.
Also on the apps, I mean, something back from the apps would be good. These are not people that have suddenly come to religion and found it right now. They've been doing basically an illegal activity for many, many years. So from a moral perspective, looking back on what we can expect of cooperation from an app, unless it's real specific, it could be tough.
I was going to suggest this in agenda item number 12, items for the next meeting is maybe we should have a larger app discussion, state of the app, et cetera, and maybe work with staff on, since Washington has freelance, what's their experience with apps, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if it really specific, there's a whole app industry discussion that we have that doesn't necessarily focus in on this one regulation, I think, that we should discuss.
Right, I agree. It's kind of been on my mind. I think that we should have some type of committee or something and engage with a lot of these tech folks who are trying to do this and formalize some type of partnership or working group with them to sort all of this out. Because I feel like we have a lot of assumptions, but they're just assumptions. Like, we can't fully know unless we're having real conversations with them at the table.
Agreed. And just to get back to our motion, I did make a note of another edit regarding the manicure services that I would like to have the word removal added.
To what?
The applying nail polish, so being able to remove and apply nail polish, just so that it's specific. Yeah. The application and removal of nail polish, in addition to the massaging of the hands and feet.
Do we have
Your thinking
acceptance
face,
of
Tammy.
that? Do we
I
have-
see your thinking face with the massaging. 'Cause I know we were trying to limit, with the services, we were limiting it so that we could limit the possibility of consumer harm and,
Shape it a little.
yeah. How do the rest of the board feel about those additions to the manicure services? The removal and the massaging of the hands and feet?
I'll take that as a friendly amendment to my motion, although I do have a question about the massaging in a home, but I'll take it up on the outside. I won't, I'll just.
I'm just waiting for the.
Yeah.
To see if we get anything back.
That was talked to. Those services are limited based on the risk assessment that we had done. And I think the concern was the massaging, especially when we get to the feet, that it's going to lead to a pedicure.
Understood, okay. Understood. So just sticking to the amendment of the removal, application and removal of nail polish for the manicures. So we'll stick to just the amendment of adding the removal of the nail polish. Everyone in agreement with that? We're amending the motion to add that?
Who was the second?
I was the second.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so again, we have a motion on the floor. Are there any additional comments or amendments we might want to make to the current motion? Does everyone remember the motion? Yes? Okay, so I will call for a vote, starting to my right.
Steve Weeks, yes.
Jackie Crabtree, no.
Polly Cortez, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Andrew Drafkin, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Okay, so the motion passes. And we'll move forward with our next regulation.
Okay, the next regulation package is for our disciplinary guidelines. So these are the guidelines that we provide to the Attorney General's office and administrative law judges, and we've gone through these and made several changes. So there's kind of two parts to this. So there's the regulatory language is the tiny little paragraph, and we incorporate the entire document by reference. So we need approval on the actual regulatory language for us to start that process, which is very minor in the regulatory language. It just basically changes the date. But then when you turn the page is a summary of all the different changes that we have made to the disciplinary guidelines.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the disciplinary guidelines as well as the language.
I second.
Okay, so we currently have a motion on the floor. Is there any public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for a vote, starting to my right.
Steve Weeks, yes.
Jackie Crabtree, yes.
Polly Cortez, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Andrew Drafkin, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Okay, so the motion passes.
Thank you.
Can I ask one question as it relates to this, specifically interference with inspection? We've recently revised our fines and placed a significant fine for interference, first offense,
Yes.
500 or 1,000? Probably 500, 500, 750, 1,000.
1,000
1,000?
for
Good,
interference.
good, good.
I think we made it 1,000 across the board, but I'll double check.
We just did, we increased
Yeah.
it,
Yes,
It was 250 or something.
yes.
They get the ball.
So have we concluded with the regulations, Christine? Okay, great. So now we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which are agenda items for our next meeting. I know Andrew had mentioned,
So my
yes.
suggestion is to, look at the apps in all forms. It's like I was wondering, I know some public comment was talking about us running our own app. I don't think we can be in our own competition with bricks and mortars, but maybe we can look into some kind of a certification process. So if an app works with us, they're certified by the board or something like that. Or also how it's affecting our industry in general.
Would you
how
be
it works in other
interest-
states.
Would you be interested in passing that to the licensing committee?
Depends, am I on the licensing committee?
I don't know.
No, just kidding.
It's up to the board, it's just a thought. We can certainly,
I actually think that might be great, because then we'll definitely have the time and space to really hash through it and then bring a report back to the board to streamline the conversation about what happens what we discussed
To
in
the
the
board?
committee meeting. If we take the
If you
topic.
take it to the committee.
To the licensing committee, because then that
Well,
time can be
freewheeling.
spent really hashing out those details and then bringing that report back to the board for a more streamlined discussion about it. So,
I will tell you that we probably won't be able to do that by the October board meeting.
okay.
Why not?
So-
Just a couple weeks away.
So, how does the rest
All
of
right, although, if we do send it to the committee, can we at least maybe just get like an initial summary at the next meeting of like what, let's say how's Washington dealing with
Sure.
the app industry
We can-
as opposed to PSP and things like that? Just an informational, here's what's in progress kind of a
Yes.
thing?
We'll do our best.
How does everyone else feel about
I mean, I'm going to be
taking a more detailed discussion about the apps into the licensing committee, although it may not be prepared by our October meeting?
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Everyone feels okay with that? Okay.
Are you okay with a verbal update at the next meeting?
Yes.
So, because just so you know, from now till the next meeting, I'll have attended the NIC conference. So I'll have a captive audience with many states that I can talk to about that as well. So,
That's great.
Okay.
And then later we can get all the details and all the bells and whistles and stuff.
Just a question about that, which would probably be included in your update at the next meeting, but maybe inquire if there's a national working group on this between states. Is
a
there one?
national what?
A working group amongst the different states?
Is there one?
Yeah,
Or, yeah, I
it's
don't
like-
think so.
Just a question, because I know that last meeting, we did have someone here from, I think it's called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They're an organization that is focused on legislation for tech.
Yeah, I
So-
don't think it's a bad idea. Well, and I could also try to see what I can find out at the conference as well.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional agenda items? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for public comment.
Jamie Schrabeck, Precision Nails, not before October, but in the future, as you work out the consequences for students who've completed their course and who are applying but are not entitled to take the exam because they've either bought their hours or done something else, it would be great to have perhaps a joint statement from the Bureau and the board titled Before You Enroll, that talks about what the rules are, again, reinforces that you can't be attending a school in California while you're living out of state, that kind of stuff, and that if you get to the point where you're submitting your application and you've done these things wrong, you're going to be denied. I don't think they think that's going to happen because it hasn't happened up to this point.
Right.
To this extent. So then, now that we're getting this cooperation, I think we need to be more outward-facing so that we can keep people from getting themselves into these situations in the first place. So if they approach a school and they're offered the opportunity to buy their hours or to go to work and still clock in, or whatever the things are, and we know that these things happen, it would be nice to have that out there so that we don't face this going forward as much. Thank you.
We did add language to our approved school list that kind of puts it out there as well, that you need to go to school, you need to not just learn how to pass the test, or you could face consequences. So we're trying to get that language out as well. And we did do a press release on the emergency decisions, and we translated that press release into multiple languages and sent it out to various organizations. I don't think we were successful, but
I'm thinking high school counselors, I mean, like everyone who's going to be interacting with young people in particular, who are going to be then having to make these career choices.
Wendy Cochran, California Estheticians. An app is someone that supports our businesses. So if you're going to have the discussion about an app and how you're going to regulate them and approve them or authorize them in any way, you're also going to have your manufacturing of all of your devices ask that you guys approve their products and, say that they are the Barber Cosmo approved infusion device or the Barber Cosmo approved LED device. And I think that once you get to a place where you're endorsing the apps, you're going to have your manufacturers of other things that are ancillary in the business to ask for those endorsements as well. So you're looking at saying, we are officially approved by the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology for you guys to use my piece of equipment. So I think if you do that with the apps, you will have those manufacturers approach you for the same allowance that you're asking for the apps. So that's something to consider.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Matt Kloppenstein on behalf of Glam Squad. Just wanted to say that we really appreciate the attention of the board on the apps and PSP generally. And we look forward to following up with staff and working on providing the licensing subcommittee with a 101 or whatever that is, or answer some questions you may have. We certainly want to be a team player with the board and want to work with you guys moving forward. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Any additional comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is a closed, no closed session?
No close.
Okay, well, ignore that agenda item. I'm going to officially adjourn our meeting. Thank you, everyone.